The whispers started the moment Clara Whitlow's boot touched the platform. "Lord have mercy! Look at the size of her!" someone hissed. In 1887 Texas, a mail-order bride was judged before she spoke a word, and Clara's fuller figure made her an instant target. The crowd's cruel laughter echoed across Clearwater's dusty station until boots struck wood with authority. "Miss Whitlow?" The wealthiest rancher in 3 counties stood before her, his eyes steady and unyielding. "I've been waiting for you." The platform fell silent. "Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels." The train's whistle still hung in the Texas air when Clara Whitlow gathered her carpetbag and stepped toward the door. Through the smudged window, she could see Clearwater Station, a weathered platform surrounded by sun-bleached buildings that seemed to shimmer in the September heat. Her heart hammered against her corset stays, though not from the temperature. This was the moment she'd rehearsed 1,000 times during the 4-day journey from Boston, the moment that would determine whether her leap of faith would end in dignity or disaster. She'd memorized every word of Alden Barrett's letters. His penmanship had been careful, almost hesitant, as though he weighed each sentence before committing it to paper. "I'm not a man of flowery speech," he'd written in his second letter, "but I can promise you respect, security, and a home where your skills will be valued. I've built something substantial here, Miss Whitlow, but a ranch is just land and cattle without someone to share it with." Those words had spoken to something deep in Clara's chest, deeper than the loneliness that had haunted her Boston boarding house, deeper than the humiliation of being passed over again and again by men who wanted delicate, fashionable wives. At 28, she'd watched younger seamstresses marry while she remained hunched over her needle, creating beautiful gowns for women who barely acknowledged her existence. The breaking point had come when Mrs. Hewitt, her wealthiest client, had suggested Clara might consider reducing her portions if she ever hoped to attract a respectable man. That night, Clara had written her response to Alden Barrett's advertisement. She'd been honest about her appearance, her age, her circumstances. She'd told him about her skill with needle and thread, her love of reading, her dreams of a place where she might be valued for more than the size of her waist. And he'd written back with an acceptance so straightforward it had made her weep. "Your honesty does you credit, Miss Whitlow. I'm not seeking perfection. I'm seeking a partner." Now, as the conductor offered his hand to help her down the steep steps, Clara squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. She'd worn her best traveling dress, a practical brown wool she'd tailored herself to flatter her fuller figure. The modest bustle was perfectly proportioned, the bodice carefully structured. She'd pinned her chestnut hair in a neat chignon beneath her simple hat. She looked respectable, capable, dignified. But the moment her boots touched the platform's sun-warmed wood, she heard it. "Sweet Jesus, would you look at that?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, male, deliberately loud enough to carry. Clara's fingers tightened on her carpetbag's handle, but she kept her eyes forward, scanning the small crowd for a tall man with dark hair, which was all Alden's letters had told her about his appearance. "That cannot be Barrett's bride." This voice belonged to a woman, sharp with disbelief and something uglier. "That great big thing? Surely not. Maybe she ate the real bride on the journey." Male laughter followed this observation, cruel and braying. "Lord have mercy, Alden Barrett must be desperate." Clara's cheeks burned, but she'd endured worse in Boston's fitting rooms, where wealthy women discussed her figure as though she were deaf. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain her composure. She would not give these strangers the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The platform seemed endless as she moved away from the train. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat began to gather beneath her collar. More whispers followed her progress, a rustling tide of judgment that seemed to come from every direction. "Looks strong enough for field work, I'll give her that." A man's voice, attempting humor that landed like stones. "Maybe Barrett's hiring hands instead of taking a wife." "George, hush, she'll hear you." The woman's attempt at discretion was half-hearted at best. "So? Everyone's thinking it. Poor Barrett, having to pretend he's pleased when that walks off the— Miss Whitlow." The voice cut through the mockery like a blade through silk, deep, calm, and absolutely certain. Clara turned toward the sound and found herself looking up into the face of a man who could only be Alden Barrett. He was taller than she'd imagined, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. His face was weathered by sun and wind, all strong angles and serious lines, with gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, steady brown eyes that looked directly at her with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Yes," Clara managed, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Mr. Barrett? I've been waiting for you." He said it simply, as though there were no crowd of onlookers, no whispered insults still hanging in the air. He held out his hand, and when Clara took it, his grip was warm and firm. "I trust your journey was bearable?" It was educational. Clara couldn't quite suppress a small smile. The understatement felt like a private joke between them, though his expression remained serious. "I imagine so. 4 days on a train would test anyone's patience." Alden's eyes swept over her face, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet assessment that somehow felt respectful rather than invasive. "You look tired. The hotel is just across the square. I've arranged a room where you can rest and refresh yourself before dinner." Clara had braced herself for disappointment, for the subtle flinch she'd seen so many times in Boston when men first saw her. But Alden Barrett's expression hadn't changed at all. He looked at her the way one might regard a business associate or a respected colleague, with serious attention and basic courtesy. "That's very thoughtful," she said, then hesitated. "Mr. Barrett, I should tell you—" "Alden." He picked up her heavy carpet bag as though it weighed nothing. "And there's nothing you need to tell me right now except whether you prefer to walk or would rather I arrange a buggy. It's not far, but the heat can be oppressive for those unaccustomed to Texas." "I can walk." Clara lifted her chin slightly. "I'm stronger than I might appear." Something flickered in Alden's eyes, perhaps approval, perhaps simple acknowledgement. "I never doubted it." He turned toward the square, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Shall we?" As Clara laid her hand on his sleeve, she became acutely aware of the stairs following them. The platform had gone quiet except for the rustle of skirts and the creak of wagon wheels somewhere in the distance. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing against her back like a physical force. "Alden?" A woman's voice rang out, sugar-sweet and poisonous. "Alden Barrett, is that truly you?" Alden paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly before he turned. Clara turned with him and found herself facing a vision of everything she was not. A slender young woman in an expensive pale blue dress that probably cost more than Clara earned in 6 months. Her blonde hair was arranged in perfect ringlets beneath a fashionable hat trimmed with silk flowers. Her waist was tiny, her posture impeccable, her smile bright and sharp as broken glass. "Miss Sutton." Alden's tone was polite but cool. "Good afternoon. We'd heard you were expecting someone today." The woman, Miss Sutton, approached with small, precise steps that showed off her figure to advantage. Her eyes swept over Clara with an assessment so quick and cutting it felt like a slap. "I'm Lucinda Sutton. My father owns the bank. You must be the seamstress from Boston?" She said seamstress the way one might say rodent or disease. Clara felt her spine straighten reflexively. "I am," Clara said clearly. "Clara Whitlow. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance." How fascinating. Lucinda's smile never wavered. A seamstress. How practical. I suppose that's a useful skill out here, where proper fashion can be so difficult to obtain. Her eyes dropped to Clara's dress, and though she said nothing more, the judgment was eloquent. "Miss Whitlow's skills are in high demand in Boston," Alden said, his voice taking on an edge Clara hadn't heard before. "She's dressed some of the city's finest families." "How wonderful." Lucinda's tone suggested it was anything but. "You must be exhausted from your journey, Miss Whitlow. The train ride from Boston is so terribly long, and then to arrive in our little town, it must be quite an adjustment. Why, I can't imagine how overwhelming it must be for someone of your background." Clara understood perfectly well that Lucinda wasn't referring to her geographic origins. The other woman's eyes had catalogued every inch of Clara's body, measuring and finding wanting. It was a familiar dance, one Clara had performed countless times in Boston's elite drawing rooms. "Clearwater seems like a lovely town," Clara said evenly. "I'm looking forward to learning more about it." Oh, you'll find we're a very close community here. Lucinda stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of expensive French perfume. Everyone knows everyone, and we all look out for one another, especially for our most prominent citizens. Her gaze slid to Alden with unmistakable possessiveness. We've known Alden since he first came to this valley. Haven't we, Alden? I was just a girl, of course, but my father helped him establish his first herd. We've always been close. Your father extended me a business loan, Alden said flatly, which I repaid in full, with interest, 6 years ago. Oh, it was so much more than business. Lucinda laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Why, Mother always says you're practically family. And speaking of family, the Cattlemen's Association dinner is in 3 weeks. I do hope you'll be attending, Alden. Everyone's expecting you, of course. You never miss it. I'll be there, Alden said. His hand moved to cover Clara's where it still rested on his arm, a gesture of support that felt both natural and deliberate. Miss Whitlow and I will both attend. The smile froze on Lucinda's face for just a heartbeat, but it was enough. Clara saw the flash of fury in those blue eyes before the mask of sweetness snapped back into place. How delightful, Lucinda said, her voice tight. I'm sure that will be memorable for everyone. Well, I mustn't keep you. Miss Whitlow looks positively wilted in this heat. Do get her out of the sun before she faints. We wouldn't want her to cause a scene. She turned in a swirl of expensive skirts and glided away, 2 other fashionably dressed young women falling into step beside her like ladies-in-waiting attending a queen. Clara watched them go, her throat tight with a humiliation that felt all the more bitter because it was so familiar. This was why she'd left Boston, to escape women like Lucinda Sutton, women who wielded their beauty and social status like weapons. And here she was in Texas, 3,000 miles from home, facing the same casual cruelty. That was Lucinda Sutton, Alden said quietly, as if Clara might have missed the introduction. The banker's daughter, as she mentioned. You'll find that Clearwater's elite, he said the word with faint distaste, consider themselves the arbiters of social acceptability. She seems very elegant, Clara said carefully. She seems very practiced at making other people feel small. Alden's voice was harder now, with an undercurrent of anger that surprised her. I apologize that your first moments in Clearwater included that display. It's not your fault. Clara tried to keep her voice light, though her chest felt tight. I'm accustomed to such assessments. Alden stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were still on the platform, still visible to anyone who cared to watch, but he seemed utterly indifferent to the audience. You shouldn't have to be accustomed to it, he said. And you won't be. Not here. Not with me. His eyes held hers, and Clara saw something fierce in their depths, something that looked almost like protection. I meant what I wrote in my letters, Miss Whitlow. What I'm offering you is respect. That's not negotiable, regardless of what small-minded people might whisper. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, a painful, hopeful thing she'd thought she'd sealed away years ago. Why? She whispered. Why me? Why did you choose my letter when you must have received others from women who look like Lucinda Sutton? Alden's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. I received 43 responses to my advertisement, he said. 42 of them were filled with lies or desperation or thinly veiled schemes to secure access to my holdings. Your letter was the only one that was honest. You told me exactly who you were, what you could offer, and what you hoped for. That's worth more than a fashionable waistline, Miss Whitlow. He started walking again, and Clara moved with him, her mind spinning. The heat pressed down like a wool blanket, but she barely noticed. They crossed the dusty square toward a 2-story building with a painted sign that read Clearwater Hotel in faded letters. I should warn you, Alden said as they mounted the hotel's front steps, that Clearwater will judge you. It's a small town, and small towns thrive on gossip. Some of that judgment will be unkind. I gathered that from the reception at the station, Clara said dryly. Yes. Alden held the door open for her, and they stepped into the hotel's dim, blessedly cool interior. But judgment and truth aren't the same thing. I've learned that much in 15 years of ranching. The people who matter, the people worth knowing, will see you for who you are. The rest are just noise. The hotel's lobby was modest but clean, with worn furniture that had been carefully maintained. An older man behind the desk looked up as they entered, his eyebrows rising when he saw Clara. She steeled herself for another round of barely concealed disdain. "Afternoon, Alden," the man said, nodding. "This must be your lady from Boston." "Miss Clara Whitlow," Alden confirmed. "Clara, this is Henry Miller. He owns the hotel and makes the best coffee in 3 counties. "Don't let my wife hear you say that, or she'll have words." Henry's smile was cautious, but not unkind as he turned to Clara. "Welcome to Clearwater, Miss Whitlow. I've prepared the corner room upstairs as requested. It's got good cross-ventilation and a decent view of the square." "Thank you," Clara said, genuinely grateful for the lack of judgment in his manner. "That sounds lovely." Henry produced a key from beneath the desk. "There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I'll have my wife send up more in an hour if you need it. Dinner's served in the dining room at 6, but if you need something earlier, just ring the bell." "I appreciate your kindness." Clara took the key, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "I'll meet you back here at 6, Alden said. "That will give you time to rest and settle in. Tomorrow, if you're agreeable, I'd like to show you the ranch. It's about an hour's ride from town." Clara nodded, suddenly overwhelmingly tired. The journey, the mockery, the confrontation with Lucinda Sutton, it had all caught up with her at once. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. Alden touched his hat brim in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. "Rest well, Clara. And try not to let the Lucinda Suttons of the world take up space in your thoughts. They're not worth it." He was gone before she could respond, his boots striking the wooden floor with quiet authority. Henry gestured toward the stairs. "Second door on the left, Miss Whitlow. And if you need anything at all, you just let us know." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a small dresser with a mirror, and a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin. The promised window offered a view of Clearwater's main square, a dusty expanse surrounded by low buildings that all seemed to lean slightly, as if tired of fighting the Texas wind. Clara set down her carpetbag and sank onto the bed, her hands shaking slightly now that she was finally alone. The tears she'd been holding back since the platform threatened to spill over, but she forced them down. She hadn't come 3,000 miles to cry in a rented room. She'd come to build a life. But God, it was hard. Harder than she'd expected, and she'd expected it to be difficult. The whispers at the station, Lucinda's cutting assessment, the barely concealed shock on faces as she'd walked past, it all pressed against her like a physical weight. "You shouldn't have to be accustomed to it," Alden had said. "And you won't be. Not here. Not with me." Clara pulled off her hat and unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. In the small mirror above the washstand, she could see herself, flushed from heat and emotion, her dress rumpled from travel, her face showing every one of her 28 years. She didn't look like Lucinda Sutton. She never would. But perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't need to. She poured water from the pitcher and washed her face and hands, the cool liquid soothing against her overheated skin. Then she unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her sewing kit, writing materials, and books on the dresser. The familiar rituals calmed her, grounding her in practical action. By the time she lay down on the bed, the emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. Through the window, she could hear the sounds of Clearwater going about its business, horses' hooves, voices calling to one another, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. This was her new home now, whether the town welcomed her or not. And Alden Barrett had looked her in the eye and promised her respect. That was more than she'd had in Boston. It was enough to build on. For now, that would have to be enough. When Clara woke, the light streaming through her window had shifted to the golden tone of late afternoon. She sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. The small clock on the dresser showed 5:30. She'd slept for nearly 3 hours. She rose and went to the washstand, splashing her face with water that had grown tepid in the heat. Her reflection looked more rested now, though her hair was a disaster of escaped pins and loose waves. She set about repairing the damage, working her brush through the tangles with practiced efficiency. For dinner with Alden, she chose her better dress, a deep green wool she'd made 2 years ago, with careful attention to cut and fit. It emphasized her height, and gave her figure a pleasing silhouette. She'd embroidered tiny vines along the collar and cuffs in darker thread, a subtle detail that most people never noticed, but that gave her satisfaction nonetheless. She pinned her hair up again, this time in a slightly softer style that framed her face. A touch of lavender water at her wrists and throat completed her preparations. When she examined herself in the mirror, she saw a respectable, capable woman. Not beautiful by conventional standards, but presentable. It would have to do. She made her way down the narrow staircase at precisely 6 o'clock, her hand trailing along the banister for balance. The lobby was empty except for Alden, who stood beside one of the worn armchairs, his hat in his hands. He'd changed clothes as well. Nothing fancy, but clean trousers and a pressed shirt that showed he'd made an effort. When he looked up and saw her descending the stairs, something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "Miss Whitlow," he said, moving forward to offer his arm. "You look rested." "I am, thank you. I didn't intend to sleep so long, but the journey caught up with me. It's a long way from Boston." Alden guided her toward a door off the lobby that Clara hadn't noticed before. "Henry's wife makes an excellent pot roast. I thought we might dine here tonight rather than at the public restaurant. It seemed less of a spectacle." Clara felt a rush of gratitude. The thought of walking into a crowded restaurant facing more stares and whispers had been weighing on her mind. "That's very considerate." The hotel's small dining room held only 4 tables, and 3 of them were empty. Alden led her to the one nearest the window, pulling out her chair with careful courtesy. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron appeared almost immediately. "This must be Miss Whitlow," she said warmly. "I'm Martha Miller, Henry's wife. Welcome to Clearwater, dear. I hope your room is comfortable." "Very much so, thank you." Clara smiled, relieved by the genuine welcome in Martha's voice. "We've got pot roast tonight, with carrots and potatoes. And I made an apple pie this morning if you've saved room for dessert." "It sounds wonderful," Clara said honestly. Her last proper meal had been breakfast in Kansas, and her stomach had started reminding her of that fact an hour ago. "I'll bring coffee while you're waiting." Martha bustled away, leaving Clara and Alden alone at the small table. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not quite awkward, but weighted with all the things they didn't yet know about each other. Clara studied Alden's face in the evening light, trying to reconcile this quiet, serious man with the passionate letters she'd read and reread until the paper wore soft. "You must have questions," Alden said finally. "About the ranch, about Clearwater, about all of this." "I have hundreds of questions," Clara admitted, "but I'm not sure where to begin." "Then I'll begin." Alden leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the table. "I came to Texas 15 years ago with $20 and a head full of ambition. I worked cattle drives for 3 years, saved every penny, and learned everything I could about ranching. When I had enough capital, I bought land, rocky, difficult land that nobody else wanted. Spent 5 years breaking it, building it, turning it into something productive." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara could hear the pride beneath the words. "It must have been incredibly difficult." "It was hell," Alden said bluntly, "especially the first few years. There were times I wasn't sure I'd make it through the winter, but the land was good. I knew it was good, and I was too stubborn to quit. Gradually, I built something that worked. Now I run 3,000 head of cattle across 5,000 acres. I employ 12 men year-round, more during roundup. The ranch is profitable and stable." Martha returned with coffee, and Alden paused while she poured. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth despite the lingering heat of the day. "Why are you telling me this, Va?" she asked when Martha had gone. "Because I want you to understand what you'd be stepping into," Alden said. "The ranch is my life's work, but it's also isolated. The main house is an hour from town. The nearest neighbor is 40 minutes away. It's beautiful land, but it's lonely. I won't lie to you about that." Clara took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground her. "I've been lonely in Boston," she said quietly, "surrounded by thousands of people and lonelier than I can possibly describe. At least your kind of lonely comes with open sky." Alden's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's one way of looking at it." "May I ask you a question?" Clara set down her cup. "Why a mail-order bride? A man in your position, wealthy, established, respected, Surely you could have your pick of local women. Women like Lucinda Sutton seem very interested in your attention. Women like Lucinda Sutton are interested in my holdings, Alden said flatly. They see a successful ranch and imagine themselves as its mistress. They don't see the work, the risk, the years of struggle it took to build. And they certainly don't see me, just what I represent. And you think I'm different? I think you've known struggle, Alden said slowly. I think you understand what it means to build something through determination and skill. I think you're honest about what you want and what you can offer. That matters more to me than social connections or a fashionable figure. Martha appeared with their dinner before Clara could respond. Generous portions of pot roast surrounded by carrots and potatoes swimming in rich gravy. The smell alone made Clara's mouth water. Eat, Martha urged. Both of you look like you could use a proper meal. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. The food was excellent, simple but expertly prepared, exactly what Clara's body needed after days of train fare and nervous appetite. She found herself relaxing slightly, the familiar act of sharing a meal breaking down some of the strangeness between them. Tell me about Boston, Alden said eventually. Your letters mentioned you were a seamstress, but not much else about your life there. Clara set down her fork carefully, considering how much to share. I've been sewing since I was 12 years old, she said. My mother was a seamstress, and she taught me everything she knew. When she died, I was 16. I took over her clients and built a modest reputation. I worked primarily for wealthy families, making gowns, tailoring garments, handling alterations. That's skilled work, Alden observed. It is, but skilled work doesn't protect you from... Clara hesitated, searching for the right words. From being invisible. I spent 12 years in fitting rooms taking measurements, pinning hems, listening to women discuss their lives as if I weren't standing 3 feet away. I was useful, but I wasn't a person to them. I was just the seamstress. That must have been difficult. It was suffocating. The admission came out more forcefully than Clara intended. I was good at my work. Very good. I could take a fashion plate and translate it into something real, something that actually fit a woman's body instead of some impossible ideal. But I was never going to be more than a hired hand, never going to have my own shop, my own home, my own life. Just rooms in a boarding house and an endless parade of women who looked through me like I was made of glass. Alden was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Is that why you answered my advertisement? To escape? Partly, Clara admitted, but also because your letters suggested something I'd almost stopped believing in, that someone might value capability over appearance. That respect might matter more than social position. It does, Alden said simply. At least, it does to me. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and when Martha brought out generous slices of apple pie, Clara found she actually had room for dessert. The sweetness and spice of the apples felt like comfort, like possibility. Tomorrow, Alden said as they lingered over coffee, I'd like to take you to the ranch, show you what I'm offering, let you see whether it's something you could actually want. You're under no obligation, Clara. I know the reception today was difficult. If you decide this isn't right for you, I'll arrange your return fare to Boston. No questions asked, no judgment. The offer was generous, more generous than Clara had any right to expect. But the thought of returning to Boston, of admitting defeat, of sliding back into that suffocating invisibility, made her chest tighten with panic. I'd like to see the ranch, she said firmly. I didn't come all this way to give up at the first obstacle. The obstacles won't stop at the first, Alden warned. Lucinda Sutton and her circle, they're influential in Clearwater. They can make life uncomfortable if they choose to. They already have chosen to, Clara pointed out. I'd rather face that discomfort as your wife, building something real, than run away from it. We're not married yet, Alden said quietly. You don't need to make that decision tonight. I know. Clara met his eyes across the small table. But I'm not afraid of hard work, Alden. I'm afraid of invisibility. I'm afraid of being forgotten. And something tells me that won't happen on your ranch. Alden's expression softened, and for the first time, Clara saw something that might have been hope. No, he said. That won't happen. They talked for another hour, about cattle and sewing, about Texas weather and Boston winters, about small things and large dreams. It wasn't romance exactly, but it was something deeper, a careful exploration of whether two strangers might build something together that was stronger than loneliness. When Alden finally walked her back to her room, the hotel was quiet and dark. He paused at her door, his expression serious in the dim lamplight. "Thank you for giving this a chance," he said. "For giving me a chance." "Thank you for seeing me," Clara replied. "Actually seeing me." Something passed between them then. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Two people who'd been invisible in their different ways, choosing to see each other. It was a beginning. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And sometimes, real was all you needed to build something that would last. The morning came too quickly, arriving with golden light that spilled through Clara's window and the distant crow of a rooster somewhere in town. She'd slept fitfully, her dreams a confused tangle of train platforms and whispered judgments, but when she rose and looked out at the awakening town, determination settled over her like armor. Today she would see the ranch, the place that might become her home. She chose her most practical dress, a sturdy gray cotton that wouldn't show dust, and braided her hair in a simple coronet that would withstand wind. When she came downstairs at 7, Alden was already waiting in the lobby, his hat in his hands, and something that might have been nervousness in the set of his shoulders. "Good morning," he said, straightening when he saw her. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough." Clara wouldn't burden him with the truth of her restless night. "I'm looking forward to seeing your ranch." "Our wagon's outside. I've packed lunch. The ride takes about an hour, and I thought you might want to spend some time there before we head back." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to see it properly. Not just the house, but the land itself. What makes it worth the work?" They stepped out into the September morning, and Clara was grateful for the relative coolness that still lingered before the sun reached its full strength. The wagon waiting at the hotel's hitching post was well maintained, the two horses hitched to it sleek and obviously well cared for. Alden helped her up onto the seat with steady hands, then swung up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled down Clearwater's main street, Clara became acutely aware of the eyes following their progress. A woman sweeping her front porch paused mid-stroke to stare. Two men outside the general store stopped their conversation to watch them pass. Near the church, a cluster of women in their Sunday best turned as one, their faces registers of shock and something uglier. "They're not subtle, are they?" Clara murmured. "Small towns rarely are." Alden's jaw was tight as he guided the horses past the last buildings. But their opinions matter less once we're beyond the town limits. The road stretched out before them, a pale ribbon cutting through increasingly wild country. As Clearwater fell away behind them, Clara felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. Out here, there were no whispers, no cutting assessments, just open land and sky so vast it made her breath catch. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "I've never seen anything like it." "Wait until you see the ranch proper." There was pride in Alden's voice now, unmistakable and earned. "The land I bought was considered worthless, too rocky, too dry, too far from water. Everyone said I was a fool for taking it on." "But you saw something they didn't." I saw potential, and I was willing to work harder than anyone thought possible to realize it." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "That's what I'm asking you to see, Clara. Not what is, but what could be, what we could build together." The hour passed in conversation that came more easily than Clara had expected. Alden told her about his early years in Texas, the brutal cattle drives and bitter winters, the slow accumulation of capital and knowledge. Clara found herself sharing stories of her own, the satisfaction of a perfectly fitted bodice, the challenge of difficult fabrics, the small triumphs that had sustained her through years of invisible labor. When they crested a rise and Alden pulled the horses to a stop, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The valley below them swept out in gentle curves, grassland dotted with stands of live oak and crossed by a creek that glittered silver in the morning sun. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing, dark shapes against the golden grass. And there, on a slight elevation that commanded a view of the entire valley, stood a house. It wasn't grand by Boston standards, no three-story mansion with ornate trim, But it was substantial and solid, built of local stone and dark wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, corrals, what looked like a bunkhouse. It spoke of permanence, of roots put down deep. "That's Barrett Ranch," Alden said quietly. "My life's work. All of it." Clara couldn't speak for a moment. She'd expected something rough, possibly crude, a bachelor's dwelling maintained for function rather than comfort. But this looked like a home, a real home, the kind of place where a life could be built. "It's magnificent," she managed finally. "It's practical," Alden corrected, but she could hear the pleasure in his voice. "Come on, I'll show you properly." They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer to the house, details emerged that made Clara's heart lift unexpectedly. Someone had planted roses near the porch. They were struggling in the Texas heat, but gamely producing blooms. The windows were generous, promising good light inside. The stonework was careful and precise, speaking of craftsmanship and care. 3 men emerged from the barn as they approached, their faces curious but respectful. Alden raised a hand in greeting. "Morning, boss," the oldest of them called. He was perhaps 50, weathered and lean, with eyes that assessed Clara with more interest than judgment. "This the lady from Boston?" "Miss Clara Whitlow," Alden confirmed, helping her down from the wagon. "Clara, this is James Crawford, my foreman. He's been with me since the beginning." "Ma'am," James touched his hat brim. "Welcome to Barrett Ranch. We've been hearing about your arrival." "I hope some of what you've heard has been positive," Clara said, trying to keep her tone light. James's expression softened slightly. "What we heard is that the boss finally found someone with sense enough to see past Clearwater's nonsense. That's positive in my book." The simple declaration of support made Clara's throat tight. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford." "Just James, ma'am? We don't stand much on formality out here." He gestured toward the house. "Boss, I took the liberty of having Rosa air out the place this morning. Figured Miss Whitlow would want to see it at its best." "Rosa Martinez is James's wife," Alden explained. "She helps maintain the main house when I'm not there, which is most of the time, since I tend to stay in town during the week." "I'd like to meet her," Clara said. "She's inside, finishing up." James nodded toward the porch. "Why don't you folks head in? We've got work to handle in the east pasture, but we'll be around if you need anything." Alden led Clara up the porch steps, and she noticed the wood was swept clean, the chairs arranged with care. When he opened the door, she stepped into a space that took her completely by surprise. The main room was generous, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, and windows that let in floods of morning light. The furniture was simple but well made. No delicate parlor pieces, but solid chairs and tables built to last. What caught Clara's attention, though, was the bookshelf that filled the entire wall opposite the fireplace, packed with volumes that ranged from agricultural manuals to what looked like poetry. "You read," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Every night." Alden moved to stand beside her, looking at his collection with something like sheepishness. "It's how I taught myself most of what I know about ranching, and the rest, well, a man needs more than just cattle and grass to think about." A woman emerged from what Clara assumed was the kitchen, small and trim, with dark hair swept back in a practical bun and warm brown eyes that assessed Clara with frank curiosity. "You must be Miss Whitlow," she said, her English accented but clear. "I'm Rosa Martinez. Welcome to the ranch." "Thank you for preparing the house," Clara said. "It's lovely." "It's big and empty, is what it is," Rosa said bluntly, but her smile softened the words. "A house needs people in it to be a home." "Alden, I've put coffee on. Why don't you show Miss Whitlow around while it brews?" The tour was revelatory. The house had 4 bedrooms upstairs, the master bedroom at the front with windows overlooking the valley, and 3 smaller rooms that Alden indicated vaguely as for future use. The master bedroom was spare but comfortable, with a large bed frame that looked handmade, a wardrobe, and a dresser with a mirror. What made Clara stop, though, was the room at the end of the hall. It was flooded with north light from 2 large windows, and someone had set up a long table beneath them. In the corner stood a dressmaker's form, slightly battered but perfectly functional. Against one wall, a chest stood open, revealing bolts of fabric in various colors and weights. Clara turned to Alden, her heart hammering. "What is this?" "A sewing room." He said it simply, as though it were obvious. You mentioned in your letters that you'd want to continue your work. I thought you'd need proper space and light. The fabrics are from a merchant in Dallas. I wasn't sure what you'd need, so I ordered a variety. If they're not suitable, we can exchange them. Clara walked slowly to the table, running her hand over the smooth wood. The windows offered perfect light, exactly what a seamstress needed for detailed work. The dressmaker's form was positioned precisely where she would have placed it herself. Someone, Alden, had thought about this, had imagined her working here, and had prepared for it. This is... Her voice caught. I've never had a space like this. In Boston, I worked in my boarding house room, with whatever light I could get from one small window. This is... too much? Alden asked, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. I should have asked first. I didn't mean to presume... It's perfect. Clara turned to face him, tears threatening despite her best efforts. It's the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me. Something in Alden's expression shifted. Relief, certainly, but also something deeper. You have real talent, Clara. Your letters made that clear. It seemed wrong to ask you to give that up just because you'd married and moved to Texas. A ranch wife has responsibilities, yes, but that doesn't mean you can't also be a seamstress. This valley needs skilled work as much as any city. They stood there in the flood of morning light, and Clara felt something fundamental shift in her chest. This wasn't just an escape from Boston's cruelty. This was an opportunity, a real chance to build not just a life, but a life of her own design. Thank you, she whispered. Truly. Downstairs, they found Rosa had set out coffee and fresh biscuits in the kitchen, a generous space with a modern stove and windows that looked out toward the barn. They sat at the sturdy table, and Rosa joined them with an ease that suggested she wasn't just an employee, but something closer to family. So, Rosa said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup, what do you think of our valley, Miss Whitlow? It's beautiful, Clara said honestly, and intimidating. Everything's so vast. You get used to the space, Rosa assured her. I came from El Paso 12 years ago, and I thought I'd go crazy from all the openness. Now I can't imagine living in a city again. She paused, then added carefully, James told me about the reception in town yesterday. The gossip. News travels fast, Clara said, trying to keep her voice neutral. News travels at exactly the speed people want it to travel, Rosa corrected. And some people in Clearwater have nothing better to do than spread cruelty. She glanced at Alden. The Sutton girl has been making noise. Alden's jaw tightened. What kind of noise? The usual kind. Questioning Miss Whitlow's suitability, suggesting you're making a mistake, hinting that she's somehow trapped you. Rosa's eyes flashed. Lucinda's been telling anyone who'll listen that the wedding will never happen, that you'll come to your senses once you've had time to think. The wedding will happen exactly as planned, Alden said flatly, if Clara still wants it after spending time here. 2 weeks, Clara heard herself say. Both Alden and Rosa turned to look at her. In town yesterday, you told Lucinda Sutton the wedding would be in 2 weeks. Were you just putting her off, or did you mean it? Alden met her gaze steadily. I meant it, if you're willing. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but I'm not a man who plays games, Clara. I asked you here because I believe we could build something good together. If you agree, I see no reason to delay. Clara's heart raced, but beneath the nervousness was something steadier, a growing certainty that surprised her with its strength. Then 2 weeks, she said. That should give me enough time to make a proper dress. Rosa's face broke into a delighted smile. You're going to make your own wedding dress? That's perfect. Show the whole town what you can do. Show them or prove something to them? Clara asked quietly. Both, Rosa said unashamedly. There's no shame in proving people wrong, especially people like Lucinda Sutton. She stood, gathering the coffee cups. Now, let me show you the rest of the house. Alden's given you the tour, but he's a man. He probably didn't mention where we keep the good china or where the cellar door sticks. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of domestic details and careful exploration. Rosa showed Clara the root cellar, the spring house, the well-tended garden behind the house where vegetables struggled valiantly against the Texas sun. She pointed out which buildings housed what equipment, where the chickens roosted, which horses were gentle enough for a novice rider. "You'll need to learn to ride," Rosa said as they stood by the corral, watching a magnificent sorrel mare pace the fence line. "Out here, a horse isn't a luxury. It's how you get anywhere. That's Copper. She's spirited, but smart. She'd be good for you once you've got some lessons." "I've never been on a horse in my life," Clara admitted. "Then you'll learn. James can teach you. He's got patience for it." Rosa studied Clara with frank assessment. "You're stronger than you look, I think. The town, they see the outside and make judgments, but I've learned to look deeper. You didn't come all this way just to run at the first hardship." "No," Clara agreed. "I didn't." They ate lunch on the porch, sandwiches and cool water from the spring house, with the valley spreading out before them like a promise. Alden pointed out the boundaries of his land, explained his plans for expanding the herd, described the careful balance of grazing and water management that kept the ranch productive. "It sounds like an endless amount of work," Clara observed. "It is," Alden said, "but it's work that builds something. Every year the ranch is stronger than it was the year before. That's satisfying in a way that's hard to explain." "I understand," Clara said. "I feel that way about sewing. Each dress is a problem to solve. How to make fabric behave, how to create a line that flatters, how to turn someone's vision into reality. When it works, when I see a woman wearing something I made and carrying herself with confidence, that's satisfaction." "Then you do understand." Alden's smile was small but genuine. "That's what I hoped, that you'd see the work not as a burden, but as a building." They left the ranch in mid-afternoon, with the sun beginning its descent toward the western hills. Clara looked back as they climbed out of the valley, watching the house grow smaller in the distance. But it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like the pause before a beginning. The ride back to Clearwater passed too quickly. Clara found herself wishing the town were farther away, that they could stay suspended in this space where it was just the two of them and the open land. But eventually, buildings appeared on the horizon, and with them, the return of tension to her shoulders. "Tomorrow," Alden said as they entered the town proper, "I need to handle some business at the bank and the land office. You're welcome to come with me, or you could remain at the hotel if you'd prefer." "I'll come," Clara decided. "I can't hide forever, and I'd like to see more of the town. Besides, I'll need to find fabric for my dress if I'm going to have it ready in 2 weeks." "There's a dry goods store on the main street. The owner, Mrs. Chen, is fair in her dealings. She should have what you need or be able to order it." Alden paused. "Clara, about the dress, you don't have to prove anything. A simple ceremony would suit me fine." "But it wouldn't suit me," Claire said firmly. "I'm a seamstress. If I can't present myself well on my wedding day, what does that say about my skill? Besides, I want to do this properly, not to prove something to Lucinda Sutton, but to honor what we're building." Alden's expression softened. "Then you'll have whatever you need. Just tell me what materials to purchase." They pulled up in front of the hotel just as the afternoon was shading into evening. Henry Miller stood on the porch, his expression troubled. "Alden," he said as they dismounted, "got something you should know. Might be nothing, but—" "What is it, Henry?" "Lucinda Sutton was here earlier, looking for Miss Whitlow. Said she wanted to welcome her properly to Clearwater." Henry's tone made clear what he thought of that notion. "I told her Miss Whitlow was out for the day. She left a card." He produced a cream-colored calling card from his pocket. Clara took it, reading the elegant script. "Miss Lucinda Sutton requests the pleasure of Miss Whitlow's company for tea tomorrow at 3 o'clock. The Sutton residence." "That's quite presumptuous," Clara said. "She didn't actually ask if I was available." "Lucinda doesn't ask," Alden said, his voice hard. "She assumes compliance. You're under no obligation to accept, Clara. What happens if I refuse?" "She'll use it as evidence that you're antisocial, ungrateful, or afraid of proper society," Alden said bluntly. "She'll spin it to make you look bad. And if I accept? She'll try to intimidate you, belittle you, or convince you that marrying me is a mistake." Alden's eyes were serious. "Either way, she wins something. That's how Lucinda operates." Clara turned the card over in her fingers, thinking. The smart thing might be to refuse, to avoid confrontation. But she hadn't come to Texas to be smart. She'd come to build a life. And sometimes building required confronting obstacles directly. "I'll go," she said finally. but on my terms. I'll arrive at 3:15 and I'll leave at 4 sharp. I'll be polite, I'll observe social niceties, but I won't be bullied. I'll come with you, Alden offered. No, Clara's voice was firm. Thank you, but this is something I need to handle myself. Lucinda wants to see if I'll crumble. I won't give her that satisfaction. Something like admiration flickered in Alden's eyes. You're certain? I've dealt with women like Lucinda Sutton my entire working life. The setting changes, but the game doesn't. Clara handed the card back to Henry. Please send word that I'll be delighted to accept Miss Sutton's invitation. That evening, Clara dined alone in her room, claiming exhaustion from the day's travel. In truth, she wanted time to think, to process everything she'd seen and felt. The ranch had been more than she'd hoped for, a real home, not just a refuge. And Alden's gesture with the sewing room had touched something deep in her chest, a place she'd thought had calcified from years of being overlooked. But tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Lucinda Sutton wasn't a woman to underestimate. Clara had seen her type before. Beautiful, privileged women who wielded social power like a weapon, and who viewed other women not as allies, but as competition to be eliminated. Clara pulled out her writing materials and began composing a letter to her friend Margaret back in Boston. The words flowed easily, describing the journey, the town, the ranch. When she reached the part about Lucinda Sutton's invitation, she paused, then wrote, I know what you would say, that I should avoid conflict, that I should try to make peace. But Margaret, some conflicts can't be avoided. They have to be walked through. Tomorrow, I walk through mine. She sealed the letter and set it aside for posting. Then she prepared for bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Through her window, she could see Clearwater's few lights twinkling in the darkness, and somewhere beyond them, the ranch waited in its valley like a promise she'd made to herself. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Clara dressed with care in her green wool dress, despite the temperature. She wanted to look respectable, capable, neither overdressed nor slovenly. She arranged her hair in a simple style that suggested confidence without vanity. Alden met her for breakfast in the hotel's small dining room, his expression concerned. You're really going through with this? I am. Lucinda won't play fair. I never expected her to. Clara accepted coffee from Martha with a smile of thanks. But neither will I. I won't be rude. Rudeness would give her ammunition. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not, either. What will you do if she insults you directly? Clara considered this. Acknowledge it. Not defensively, but factually. Women like Lucinda depend on their victims being too intimidated to call out bad behavior. If I simply state what she's doing calmly and clearly, it removes her power. Alden's expression was equal parts worried and impressed. You've thought about this. I've had 28 years to think about it, Clara said quietly. I've been underestimated and overlooked my entire life, Alden. I know how the game is played. They spent the morning at the bank and land office, where Clara observed Alden's business dealings with interest. The bank manager, Lucinda's father, was polite but cool, his eyes assessing Clara with the same calculations she'd seen in his daughter. At the land office, however, the clerk was friendlier, complimenting Alden on his ranch's success and welcoming Clara to the area with what seemed like genuine warmth. At noon, they walked to Mrs. Chen's dry goods store, a surprisingly well-stocked establishment tucked into a corner of the main street. Mrs. Chen herself was a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a shrewd expression. So you're the bride everyone's talking about, she said, looking Clara up and down. The one who's got Lucinda Sutton in a state. I didn't realize I had such an effect, Clara said dryly. Oh, you've got an effect, all right. She was in here yesterday asking what fabrics you'd looked at. I told her you hadn't been in yet. Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. I don't care for Lucinda Sutton. She once tried to return a dress 6 months after purchase because she'd gained weight and blamed my fabric for stretching, as if silk poplin stretches. She turned to Alden. You've chosen well, Mr. Barrett. A woman who can sew is worth 10 who can only spend. I need fabric for a wedding dress, Clara said, warming to the practical woman. Something appropriate for a ranch wedding, but well made. Do you have silk or fine wool? Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. Come to the back. I've got a bolt of ivory silk that came in last month. Nobody in this town has the skill to work it properly, but you look like you might." The fabric was beautiful, a heavy silk with just enough texture to hold its shape. Clara ran it through her fingers, feeling its weight and drape. In her mind, she could already see the dress taking form, simple lines that would flatter her figure, careful construction that would showcase her skill. "This is perfect. I'll take 10 yards, and I'll need thread, buttons, and interfacing." Clara's mind was already calculating measurements and cuts. "You're making your own wedding dress?" Mrs. Chen looked impressed. "That's bold." "I'm a seamstress," Clara said simply. "If I can't dress myself well, how can I expect anyone to trust me with their own garments?" "Smart?" Mrs. Chen began measuring out the fabric. "There's not much call for fine sewing in Clearwater. Most women make do with simple work. But if you're as skilled as you seem, you might find customers among the ranchers' wives. They travel to Dallas for fashion, but it's expensive and time-consuming. A local seamstress with real talent could do well." "I'd like that," Clara said. "I don't want to give up my work just because I'm marrying." "Then don't." Mrs. Chen wrapped the purchases with efficient movements. "A woman who gives up her skills for marriage often regrets it. Trust me, I've been married 30 years, and my husband values my business sense as much as my cooking." Clara left the store with her arms full of parcels and her spirits considerably lifted. But as 3 o'clock approached, nervousness returned. She changed into her best dress, the green wool, and arranged her hair once more. In the mirror, she saw a respectable woman, neat and proper. It would have to be enough. The Sutton residence was the largest house in Clearwater, a 2-story affair with gingerbread trim and a manicured lawn that must have cost a fortune to maintain in the Texas heat. Clara mounted the front steps at precisely 3:15, squared her shoulders, and knocked. A maid answered, a young Mexican girl who looked nervous. "Miss Whitlow? Miss Sutton is expecting you in the parlor." Clara followed her through a hallway lined with expensive wallpaper and formal portraits. The parlor was exactly what she'd expected: overstuffed furniture, heavy drapes, every surface covered with decorative objects designed to display wealth. And there, arranged on a velvet settee like a painting, sat Lucinda Sutton. She wasn't alone. 3 other young women flanked her, all dressed in expensive afternoon dresses that emphasized their fashionable figures. They looked up as Clara entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. "Miss Whitlow," Lucinda said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How kind of you to come. Please sit. We're just about to have tea." Clara took the chair indicated, deliberately positioned lower than the settee, she noticed, so she'd have to look up at Lucinda. It was a small power play, but revealing. "Thank you for the invitation," Clara said politely. "It's generous of you to welcome a stranger to Clearwater." "Oh, we always welcome newcomers," Lucinda assured her. "Though I must admit, your arrival has caused quite a stir. Everyone's so curious about Alden's mysterious bride from Boston." "I can imagine." Clara accepted a teacup from the nervous maid. "Small towns do love their gossip." "It's not just gossip," one of the other women interjected. She was a redhead with sharp features and assessing eyes. "Alden Barrett is the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. Half the women in Texas have been trying to catch his attention for years. And then you show up and suddenly he's planning a wedding?" "Sometimes things happen quickly when they're right," Clara said mildly. "Or when one party is desperate," Lucinda said, still smiling. "Tell me, Miss Whitlow, what exactly does a seamstress do to earn enough for train fare across the country? That must have been quite expensive." The insult was barely veiled, the suggestion that Clara might have earned her fare through questionable means. Clara took a careful sip of tea before responding. "I saved my earnings over several years," she said calmly. "Skilled seamstresses can earn decent wages in Boston. Not enough to live lavishly, but enough to plan for the future." "How fortunate," Lucinda purred. "And now you'll be mistress of Barrett Ranch. Quite an elevation in circumstances." "I'll be Alden's wife," Clara corrected gently. "The ranch is his life's work, not my prize." "How sweetly naive," the redhead laughed. "Do you really expect us to believe you answered a mail-order advertisement for anything but money? Every woman here knows what Barrett Ranch is worth." Clara set down her teacup carefully. "I expect you to believe whatever you choose, but I'll tell you the truth anyway. I came to Texas looking for respect, not money. I came hoping to find a partner who valued capability over appearance, and I found exactly that in Alden Barrett. Respect. Lucinda's smile had a knife edge now. How charmingly practical. But Miss Whitlow, surely you understand that Alden Barrett is part of Clearwater society. The ranch may be isolated, but he has obligations here, social obligations. The Cattlemen's Association dinner, for instance. It's the most important event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. Alden mentioned it, Claire said. Did he mention that it's formal? That the women wear their finest gowns? That it's essentially a display of refinement and taste? Lucinda leaned forward slightly. Can you imagine walking into that room, Miss Whitlow, with all of Texas ranching society watching, judging? I can imagine it perfectly, Clara said. I've walked into rooms full of judgment my entire life. But never as Alden Barrett's wife. The third woman spoke up now, a brunette with cold eyes. Never with his reputation on the line. Do you really want to be the woman who embarrasses him? Who makes him a laughingstock? And there it was, the real attack. Not on Clara directly, but on her relationship with Alden. The suggestion that her very existence would harm him. Clara took a slow breath, then met Lucinda's eyes directly. Let me be very clear about something, she said, her voice calm but firm. I understand that you're concerned about Alden's reputation. I understand that my appearance doesn't match your expectations for a rancher's wife. And I understand that you're trying, right now, to convince me that the kindest thing I could do is walk away. She paused, letting the silence stretch. The other women shifted uncomfortably. But here's what you don't understand, Clara continued. Alden chose me. Not because he was desperate, not because he was tricked, but because he saw something in me that mattered more than social approval. And I chose him for the same reason. So while I appreciate your concern, the word dripped with irony, I'm not going anywhere. Lucinda's smile had frozen into something ugly. How touching. But tell me, Miss Whitlow, what happens when the novelty wears off? When Alden realizes that having a wife who embarrasses him at every social function isn't quite the partnership he imagined? Then I suppose that will be between Alden and me, Clara said. She stood, setting down her teacup with careful precision. Thank you for the tea, Miss Sutton. It's been educational. You're leaving already? Lucinda's voice had lost its sweetness. But we've barely had a chance to get to know you. I think we've gotten to know each other perfectly well, Clara said. Good afternoon, ladies. She walked out of that parlor with her head high and her hands steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. Behind her, she heard furious whispers, but she didn't look back. The maid caught up with her at the front door, pressing something into her hand, a folded piece of paper. Miss Sutton isn't used to being refused, the girl whispered. Be careful. Clara stepped out into the afternoon heat, unfolding the paper once she was clear of the house. On it, in Lucinda's elegant script, was written, You can't win. Leave now while you still have dignity. Clara crumpled the note in her fist and kept walking. She had no intention of leaving, and if Lucinda Sutton wanted a fight, she'd just found one. Clara walked back to the hotel with Lucinda's crumpled note burning in her palm and fury singing through her veins. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but she barely felt it. Her mind was already racing ahead, planning, calculating. She'd handled the tea party well enough, hadn't crumbled, hadn't given Lucinda the satisfaction of seeing her break. But that note made one thing abundantly clear. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Alden was waiting in the hotel lobby, his face tight with concern. He rose the moment she entered, his eyes searching hers. How did it go? He asked quietly. Clara glanced around the lobby. Henry was behind the desk, pretending not to listen, but clearly interested. Two townsmen sat in the corner chairs, their conversation halted mid-sentence. She could feel their curiosity like a physical weight. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked. Alden nodded and gestured toward the dining room, which was empty at this hour. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, Clara handed him the crumpled note. She watched his face darken as he read it, his jaw clenching. That woman has no boundaries, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What happened in there, Clara? She told him everything, the careful seating arrangement designed to make her feel small, the veiled insults about her finances and motivations, the suggestions that she would embarrass him at social functions. She described each woman's role in the performance, the way they'd work together like a well-rehearsed ensemble, all building toward one conclusion, that Clara should leave before she destroyed Alden's reputation. And then she handed me that note as I was leaving, Clara finished, as if the conversation hadn't been clear enough. Alden was quiet for a long moment, staring at the crumpled paper in his hand. When he looked up, his eyes held something Clara hadn't seen before. Cold fury, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "I'm going to the Sutton house," he said. "This ends now." "No." Clara's voice was firm. She reached out and took the note from his hand, smoothing it carefully on the table between them. "That's exactly what she wants. She wants you angry, wants you to come charging in to defend me. It makes me look weak, like I need protection, and it gives her an excuse to play the victim. Poor Lucinda, attacked by angry Alden Barrett for simply trying to be friendly. She threatened you." "She tried to intimidate me," Clara corrected. "There's a difference, and I didn't give her the satisfaction of succeeding." She met his eyes steadily. "I can fight my own battles, Alden. I need to fight my own battles. If I can't stand up to Lucinda Sutton without you riding to my rescue, how can I possibly be the kind of partner this ranch needs?" Alden studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're right. I don't like it, but you're right." He gestured to the note. "What will you do with that?" "Keep it," Clara said, "as a reminder of what I'm dealing with. And if Lucinda ever tries to play innocent, I'll have evidence of her true intentions." "She won't stop with tea and threatening notes," Alden warned. "Now that you've refused to be intimidated, she'll escalate. Lucinda's used to getting what she wants, and she's never learned to lose gracefully." "Then she's about to learn." Clara folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "I have 2 weeks to make a wedding dress that will show this town exactly what a Boston seamstress can do. And after that, I have a lifetime to prove that I belong here." Something shifted in Alden's expression. Respect, certainly, but also something warmer. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "Someone more, tentative. Someone who'd need sheltering." He smiled slightly. "I'm starting to think you're tougher than half my ranch hands." I've had to be," Clara said simply. "Women like me don't survive by being delicate." They dined together that evening in the hotel's dining room, and Clara became acutely aware of the attention their presence drew. Every table in the small room was occupied, which was unusual for a Wednesday evening. People kept glancing their way, conversations pausing whenever Alden laughed at something Clara said. She could feel speculation hanging in the air like smoke. "The whole town is watching us," she murmured. "Let them watch," Alden said. "They'll see that I'm pleased with my choice. That's all that matters." But as they finished their meal, Martha Miller approached their table, her expression troubled. "Alden, might I have a word?" she asked quietly. "In private?" They followed her into the hotel's small office behind the front desk. Henry was there too, his weathered face creased with concern. "We hate to tell you this," Martha began, wringing her hands, "but we thought you should know. Lucinda Sutton has been making the rounds this afternoon. She stopped by the general store, the church, the seamstress shop, anywhere people gather. She's telling everyone that Clara was rude to her, that she left the tea party early in a huff, that she's clearly unsuited for polite society." "And people are believing her?" Alden's voice was tight. "Some are," Henry admitted. "The Suttons have influence in this town, Alden. People don't like to cross them. And Lucinda's story is convincing. She's playing the hurt hostess who tried to extend friendship only to be rebuffed." "That's not what happened," Clara said firmly. "She invited me to tea specifically to intimidate me into leaving town. When I refused to be intimidated, she gave me a note telling me to leave while I still had dignity." Martha's eyes widened. "She actually wrote that down?" Clara produced the crumpled note. Martha read it, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "This is shameful," she said. "Absolutely shameful. But Clara, you need to understand. Without proof, it's your word against hers. And Lucinda has spent her whole life building a reputation as Clearwater's social darling." "What about the note?" Clara asked. "It helps," Henry said slowly, "but only if you show it to the right people, at the right time. Use it too early, and Lucinda will spin some story about how you misunderstood or took it out of context. Timing matters with something like this." "Then when?" Clara demanded, frustration rising in her chest. When do I defend myself? At the wedding, Martha said suddenly. When you walk down that aisle in front of the whole town, that's when you show them who you really are. Not through words or notes, but through dignity and grace, and a dress so beautiful it stops their breath. Clara stared at her. You want me to use my wedding as… what? A statement? Your wedding is already a statement, Martha said gently. Whether you intend it or not. Lucinda's counting on you to look overwhelmed, out of place, desperate. If instead you look confident and beautiful, if you carry yourself like a woman who knows exactly what she's worth, that speaks louder than any note. It was a gamble, Clara realized. A significant gamble. But Martha was right. Her wedding would be the first time the entire town saw her in a context she controlled. Not stepping off a train to mockery, not navigating Lucinda's parlor games, but standing beside Alden as his chosen partner. Then I'll need to make this dress perfect, she said quietly. Not just good. Perfect. You'll have help, Martha promised. I can sew a straight seam when needed. And Rosa Martinez is coming into town tomorrow. Alden, didn't you mention she'd be staying here for a few days? She is, Alden confirmed. James needs to oversee some cattle sales in Dallas, and Rosa doesn't like staying at the ranch alone. She'll be here through the weekend. Then between the three of us, we'll make sure Clara has what she needs. Martha's expression was fierce now, determined. Lucinda Sutton has ruled this town's social life for too long. It's time someone reminded her that money and beauty aren't everything. Over the next week, Clara threw herself into creating her wedding dress with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She worked in her hotel room from dawn until late evening, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she cut and pinned and basted. The ivory silk whispered under her hands, each stitch a small act of defiance against everyone who'd ever told her she wasn't enough. Rosa arrived on Thursday and proved to be an invaluable ally. She had a sharp eye for detail and steady hands, helping with the tedious work of hemming and finishing seams. More than that, she brought news from the ranch and a no-nonsense perspective that kept Clara grounded. James says the hands are all betting on how long it takes before you put Lucinda Sutton in her place, Rosa reported on Friday afternoon, her needle flashing as she worked on the dress's hem. Most of them give it 2 weeks. A few think you've already done it. I haven't done anything yet, Clara said, carefully setting a sleeve. I just refuse to be bullied. That's more than most people do. Rosa bit off a thread and examined her work critically. Lucinda's used to everyone either fearing her or wanting to be her. You're the first person to simply dismiss her. It's driving her crazy. Good, Clara said with more venom than she intended. Then, softer, I'm sorry, that was uncharitable. It was honest. Rosa looked up from her sewing. You don't have to pretend to be sweet all the time, Clara. Not with me. I've known women like Lucinda my whole life. Beautiful women who use their looks as weapons and think the world owes them worship. They need to be stood up to, not coddled. Martha joined them each afternoon after the lunch rush at the hotel, and the three women formed an unlikely alliance. Martha knew everyone in Clearwater and quietly spread word that Clara was working on something special, building anticipation. Rosa brought ranch news and earthy humor that made Clara laugh when the pressure felt overwhelming. Together, they created a support system Clara had never experienced before, women who valued her for her skill and strength rather than judging her for her appearance. But not everything was going smoothly in town. On Saturday, Clara ventured to Mrs. Chen's shop to purchase additional thread and found the atmosphere distinctly chilly. Two women who'd been examining fabric bolts fell silent when she entered, their eyes sliding away from hers. Mrs. Chen's greeting was friendly enough, but even she seemed subdued. Has something happened? Clara asked quietly as Mrs. Chen wrapped her purchases. The older woman glanced toward the two other customers, then leaned closer. Lucinda Sutton has been making noise about boycotting anyone who does business with you. Says you're a disruptive influence on Clearwater society. Most people are ignoring her, but some of the shop owners are worried. The Suttons hold mortgages on half the buildings in town. Clara felt cold fury wash through her. She's threatening people's livelihoods because I won't leave town? Welcome to small-town politics, Mrs. Chen said dryly. But don't worry too much. Most folks see through Lucinda's nonsense, and those who don't aren't worth your time anyway. She pressed the wrapped packages into Clara's hands. You keep working on that dress. Show them what real craftsmanship looks like. On Sunday, Clara attended church with Alden, her first truly public appearance as his fiancé. The small white church was packed, with families crowding into pews and late arrivals standing along the back wall. Clara felt every eye track their progress as Alden led her to a pew near the front, his hand steady at her elbow. The Suttons sat across the aisle, Lucinda resplendent in a pale pink dress that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. She didn't look at Clara directly, but her presence was a challenge all the same. Perfectly dressed, perfectly positioned, perfectly poised. The sermon was about love and commitment, which felt both appropriate and ironic. Reverend Thompson was an older man with kind eyes and a tendency toward lengthy quotations, but his message was sound. That marriage was about partnership, about choosing someone and continuing to choose them every day. After the service, people gathered outside in the churchyard, and Clara braced herself for the inevitable social gauntlet. Some townspeople greeted her warmly enough, ranchers and their wives who seemed to respect Alden's judgment. Others were coolly polite, their smiles not reaching their eyes. And a few simply ignored her entirely, turning away when she and Alden approached. Lucinda, naturally, made sure to position herself where Clara couldn't avoid her. "Miss Whitlow," she said sweetly, her voice carrying across the churchyard, "how lovely to see you in church. I wasn't sure if you'd feel comfortable among Clearwater's congregation." "Why wouldn't I be comfortable?" Clara asked mildly. "Oh, no reason." Lucinda's smile was poisonous. "It's just that we're such a close community. Everyone knows everyone. It can be difficult for outsiders to find their place." She turned to the woman beside her, the cold-eyed brunette from the tea party. "Don't you think so, Eleanor?" "Quite difficult," Eleanor agreed, "especially when someone doesn't understand our ways." "I'm always happy to learn," Clara said, "though I've found that kindness and honesty tend to be valued the same way everywhere." "How sweetly naive," Lucinda's eyes glittered. "But Miss Whitlow, surely you realize that some things require more than just basic virtues. Alden is an important man in this county. His wife will need to represent him at significant events. The Cattlemen's Association dinner, for instance." She paused delicately. "I understand you're planning to attend." "I am." "How brave of you." The words dripped with false admiration. "Walking into that ballroom, with all of Texas Ranching Society watching, I do hope you have something appropriate to wear. The ladies always dress so elegantly. It would be dreadful if you felt out of place." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but Alden stepped forward, his voice cutting through the false sweetness like a blade. "Clara will be the most elegantly dressed woman there," he said flatly. "She's a professional seamstress from Boston, Lucinda. She's dressed some of the finest families in that city. I'm quite certain she can handle a country dinner party." Lucinda's smile froze. "Of course. I meant no offense. You were simply trying to make my fiancé feel inadequate," Alden said, his tone conversational, but his eyes hard. "As you've been doing since she arrived in Clearwater. I think it's time we were clear about something, Lucinda. Clara and I are getting married in 1 week. Your approval is neither required nor relevant. And if you continue this campaign of subtle cruelty, I will make it my business to ensure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of woman you are." The churchyard had gone very quiet. People had stopped their conversations to watch, and Clara could feel the weight of their attention. Lucinda's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she hissed. "My father—" "Your father extended me a business loan 15 years ago, which I repaid in full," Alden interrupted. "That debt is settled, Lucinda. It doesn't give you power over me, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to torment my future wife." He offered Clara his arm. "Come on, let's go." They walked away through a sea of stunned faces, and Clara could hear the explosion of whispers behind them. Her heart was pounding, her face hot with a mixture of embarrassment and fierce pride. Alden had just publicly defended her in front of the entire town, had drawn a line in the dust that no one could miss. "That was quite a statement," she murmured as they reached his wagon. It was overdue. Alden's hands were tight on the reins as he helped her up. "I should have said something that first day on the platform. Should have made it clear then that mockery of you wouldn't be tolerated." "You did make it clear," Clara said softly. You stood beside me and treated me with respect. That was its own statement. Not loud enough, apparently. Alden swung up beside her, his jaw still tight with anger. Lucinda's been spreading poison through this town for a week, and I let it happen because I thought you wanted to handle it yourself. But I'm done being diplomatic. You're going to be my wife, Clara. That makes any attack on you an attack on me. They rode back to the hotel in tense silence, and Clara's mind churned with the implications of what had just happened. Alden's public defense was gallant, certainly, but it also changed the dynamics of her battle with Lucinda. Now, it wasn't just about two women fighting for position. It was about the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties publicly rejecting Clearwater's social queen. The fallout came swiftly. By Monday afternoon, word had spread through town like wildfire. Martha reported that the general store was buzzing with gossip, split between those who thought Alden had been too harsh and those who felt Lucinda had finally received her due. At the millinery shop, the owner confided to Rosa that she was relieved someone had finally stood up to Lucinda's manipulation. But at the bank, Mr. Sutton was reportedly furious, making dark pronouncements about loyalty and ingratitude. This is getting out of hand, Clara said Tuesday morning as she worked on her dress's bodice. Martha and Rosa sat nearby, helping with the final details. Alden shouldn't have to choose between me and his standing in the community. He's not choosing, Rosa said firmly. He's establishing boundaries that should have been set years ago. Lucinda's been trading on her looks and her father's money for too long. Someone needed to tell her no. But the timing, Clara protested. Right before the wedding, right before the cattleman's dinner, we're making enemies at the worst possible moment. Better to make enemies honestly than to pretend friendship with snakes, Martha said. And Clara, you need to understand something. Most people in Clearwater are tired of Lucinda's games. They just haven't had the courage to say so. Alden speaking up gave them permission to think differently. A knock on the door interrupted them. Martha rose to answer it and returned with a confused expression. There's a woman downstairs asking for you, Clara. Says her name is Mrs. Patricia Harding, and she needs a seamstress urgently. Clara exchanged glances with Rosa. I don't know anyone by that name. She's the wife of one of the larger ranchers north of here, Martha said. The Hardings don't come to town often. They're usually in Dallas for supplies. But she's here, and she specifically asked for you. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Clara went downstairs to find a well-dressed woman in her 50s waiting in the lobby. Mrs. Harding had the weathered elegance of a woman who'd spent years on a ranch, but refused to let frontier life diminish her standards. She looked up as Clara descended the stairs, her sharp eyes assessing. Miss Whitlow? I'm Patricia Harding. I apologize for the unexpected visit, but I heard you're a seamstress from Boston, and I find myself in desperate need of your skills. I'm happy to help if I can, Clara said cautiously. What do you need? A dress for the Cattlemen's Association dinner. I had one ordered from Dallas, but the seamstress there made it 3 sizes too small and in entirely the wrong color. It arrived yesterday, and it's unwearable. Patricia's expression was wry. I heard through the grapevine that you're attending the dinner with Alden Barrett, which means you must be making your own dress. If you have time before the wedding, I'd be grateful for your help. I'll pay whatever you ask. Clara's mind raced. This was an opportunity. A chance to demonstrate her skills to exactly the kind of client she'd need if she wanted to establish a seamstress business in Texas. But it was also a risk. If she took time away from her own dress to work on Patricia's, she might not finish either one properly. The dinner is in 2 weeks, Clara said slowly, and my wedding is in 6 days. That's not much time. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate. Patricia leaned forward slightly. But I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitlow. I've also heard about the situation between you and Lucinda Sutton. That girl has needed someone to stand up to her for years. If you're brave enough to do that, and skilled enough to dress yourself well, then you're exactly the kind of seamstress this valley needs. I'd like to help you establish that reputation. Clara studied the older woman's face, seeing genuine respect there. And something else. Opportunity. Alliance. Show me what you have, Clara decided. If the fabric is salvageable, I might be able to redesign it into something appropriate, but I can't promise anything until I see what I'm working with. Patricia's face lit up. My wagon's outside. The disaster of a dress is in the back. And Miss Whitlow, thank you. You're doing me a greater favor than you know." The dress Patricia showed her was indeed a disaster, poorly cut, badly sewn, and in a shade of yellow that would flatter no one over 30. But the fabric itself was good quality silk, and Clara's mind immediately began redesigning it, seeing how she could salvage the material into something elegant. "I can work with this," she said finally, "but I'll need to take your measurements and discuss what style you prefer. And I'll be honest, Mrs. Harding, I can't finish this before my own wedding dress. You'll have to wait until after I'm married." "That's perfectly acceptable. The wedding is in 6 days, the dinner is in 8 days after that. If you can finish mine in that time, you'll have my eternal gratitude and my enthusiastic recommendation to every rancher's wife in North Texas." They spent the next hour discussing design, and Clara found herself genuinely enjoying the work. Patricia Harding had opinions, but listened to expert advice, understanding that a good seamstress knew how to flatter a figure better than the woman wearing it. By the time Patricia left, Clara had a clear vision of the dress and a commission that would pay more than she'd earned in a month in Boston. Rosa, who'd come downstairs during the consultation, watched Patricia's wagon roll away with a thoughtful expression. "Do you know what just happened?" she asked. "I got a commission," Clara said uncertainly. "You got an alliance. Patricia Harding is one of the most respected women in the ranching community. If she wears a dress you made to the cattleman's dinner and tells people you created it, every rancher's wife there will want to hire you." Rosa's smile was fierce. "Lucinda just lost ground, and she doesn't even know it yet." The next 5 days passed in a blur of needle and thread, of careful stitching and meticulous finishing. Clara worked on her wedding dress with the intensity of someone who knew her entire future was being judged by every seam, every stitch, every careful detail. The bodice took shape first, carefully structured to emphasize her height and give her figure a graceful silhouette. The skirt followed, with careful pleating that allowed the silk to move beautifully without adding bulk. Martha and Rosa helped when they could, but Clara insisted on doing the most crucial work herself. This was her statement, her proof of skill, and it had to be perfect. She worked by lamplight long after the hotel had gone quiet, her fingers moving with practiced precision even when her eyes burned with exhaustion. On Thursday, 3 days before the wedding, Alden came to take her to dinner and found her still sewing in her room, the dress spread across every available surface. "Clara," he said gently, "you need to rest. You're going to exhaust yourself before the wedding." "I'm almost done," she murmured, not looking up from the hem she was finishing. "Just this section, and then the final pressing?" "It's beautiful." Alden moved closer, studying the dress with genuine admiration. "More than beautiful, it's remarkable. Any woman in Texas would be proud to wear something like this." "It has to be more than just any dress," Clara said, finally setting down her needle. "It has to be perfect, because every person in that church will be judging whether I'm good enough for you, whether I belong here, whether I'm worth the trouble I've caused." "You're not trouble," Alden said firmly. He knelt beside her chair so they were eye level, his hands taking hers. "And you don't have to prove anything with a dress, Clara. You've already proven who you are, strong, capable, talented. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth impressing." "But I need them to see it," Clara insisted, surprising herself with the passion in her voice. "Not for pride, Alden, but for survival. If I'm going to build a life here, I need people to respect my skills. This dress is my credentials, my resume. It's me saying, I belong in this valley, and I have something valuable to offer." Alden was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Then finish it," he said finally. "Make it perfect. But promise me you'll rest afterward. I need you clear-headed for our wedding day." "I promise." Clara managed a tired smile. "Though I might sleep for a week once this is all over." "You'll be on a ranch with plenty of quiet places to rest," Alden pointed out. "I'm planning to take the week after the wedding off from heavy work. Give us time to adjust to each other." The reminder of what came after the wedding, the marriage itself, the intimacy and partnership she'd committed to with this near stranger, sent a flutter of nervousness through Clara's stomach. But looking at Alden's steady, serious face, she felt something stronger than nervousness. Trust. Hope. "I'd like that," she said softly. On Friday evening, Clara put the final stitches in her wedding dress and stepped back to examine her work. The gown hung on the dressmaker's form she'd borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and in the lamplight it glowed like captured moonlight. The bodice fit perfectly, structured but not stiff, emphasizing without exaggerating. The skirt fell in graceful lines that would move beautifully when she walked. The details, tiny silk-covered buttons down the back, delicate pin tucking at the cuffs, a subtle train that suggested elegance without being impractical, all spoke of masterful craftsmanship. Martha and Rosa came to see the finished product and both fell silent, staring. "Clara," Martha breathed finally, "that's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen." "It's more than beautiful," Rosa said, walking around it slowly. "It's a work of art. When you walk down that aisle tomorrow, every woman in that church is going to want one just like it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Exhaustion, relief, pride all tangled together. "You think it's good enough?" "Good enough?" Martha laughed. "Honey, it's spectacular. Lucinda Sutton can eat her heart out." That night, Clara fell into bed utterly spent but satisfied. Her dress was done. Tomorrow, she would marry Alden Barrett, and the day after that, she would face Clearwater as his wife, armed with nothing but her dignity, her skill, and the hope that it might be enough. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, without a cloud in the vast Texas sky. Clara woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and anticipation. Martha brought breakfast to her room, toast and tea, light enough not to upset her stomach, and helped her bathe and arrange her hair. "You're going to be beautiful," Martha assured her as she worked Clara's chestnut hair into an elegant updo. "But more than that, you're going to be dignified, composed, everything a rancher's wife should be." Rosa arrived at noon with a bouquet of wildflowers, purple prairie verbena, white prickly poppies, and sprigs of fragrant sage. "From the ranch," she said simply. "James picked them this morning. He said to tell you that the whole crew is rooting for you." By 2 o'clock, Clara was dressed. She stood before the mirror and barely recognized herself. The ivory silk transformed her, giving her a grace and elegance she'd never seen in her own reflection. Her hair, carefully arranged with a few wildflowers tucked into the updo, framed her face softly. She looked like a bride, not fashionable by Boston standards, perhaps, but beautiful in a way that felt true. The church was packed when Alden's wagon pulled up outside. Clara could see faces pressed against the windows, people crowding the doorway. The entire town had turned out, to witness the wedding, certainly, but also to judge. "Ready?" Rosa squeezed her hand. Clara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped down from the wagon. The crowd outside the church fell silent as she approached. She could feel their eyes cataloging every detail: the dress, her hair, her composure. She kept her head high and her pace steady, refusing to hurry or hesitate. Inside, the church was stifling, packed with bodies and heavy with expectation. As Clara moved to the back of the aisle, waiting for her cue to walk, she caught a glimpse of Lucinda Sutton sitting in the third row. The other woman's face was a mask of fury barely contained by social propriety. Then the music began. A simple hymn played on the church's old piano, and it was time. Clara stepped into the aisle, and a collective gasp rippled through the congregation. She kept her eyes forward, focused on Alden waiting at the altar, but she could feel the shock, the reassessment happening in every pew she passed. Alden's expression when he saw her made everything, the exhaustion, the conflict, the fear, worth it. His eyes widened and something like awe crossed his face. He stepped forward to meet her halfway, an old gesture that wasn't traditional but felt right. "Clara," he murmured as he offered his arm. "You're breathtaking." They walked the final steps together, and as they turned to face Reverend Thompson, Clara caught a glimpse of the congregation. Faces that had been skeptical now showed surprise, even admiration. Women leaned together, whispering. Men nodded approvingly. And in the third row, Lucinda Sutton's face was pale with fury. Clara smiled and turned her full attention to the man beside her, the man who'd looked past Clearwater's judgment and seen her worth. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and promises, of Alden's steady voice, and her own surprisingly calm responses. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Clara felt the weight of commitment settle into her bones. This was real. She was married now, bound to this man and this place. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thompson said, smiling. Alden cupped her face gently and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through Clara's chest. This was her husband now, her partner, her choice. They turned to face the congregation as man and wife, and the church erupted in applause. People stood, crowding forward with congratulations. Women Clara didn't know touched her dress with admiring fingers, asking where she'd had it made. Men clapped Alden on the back, grinning. And through it all, Clara caught one final glimpse of Lucinda Sutton, standing frozen in her pew while people pushed past her to reach the bride and groom. Clara had won, not through cruelty or manipulation, but through skill and dignity and the simple act of refusing to be made small. As she and Alden walked back down the aisle together, his hand warm around hers, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not quite belonging yet, but the beginning of it. The first thread in a new life she was going to weave with her own hands. The reception took place in the church hall, a modest space that had been transformed by willing hands. Wildflowers in mason jars decorated tables covered with white cloths, and someone had strung paper lanterns across the ceiling. Martha and Rosa had organized everything, refusing Clara's offers to help with a firmness that brooked no argument. Now, as Clara stood beside Alden greeting well-wishers, she was profoundly grateful for their intervention. The line of people offering congratulations seemed endless. Ranch hands in their Sunday best shook Alden's hand and tipped their hats to Clara with genuine warmth. Older ranchers who'd known Alden since his early days clapped him on the shoulder and welcomed Clara to the valley. Their wives examined her dress with frank admiration, several asking where they might commission similar work. "I'm establishing a seamstress business," Clara found herself saying over and over. "Once I'm settled at the ranch, I'll be taking commissions." "Good," said one weathered woman with kind eyes. "We've needed a proper seamstress in this valley for years. Most of us make do with mail order or trips to Dallas, and neither is satisfactory." Patricia Harding appeared in the line, resplendent in deep burgundy silk, her husband Thomas beside her. She took Clara's hands warmly. "My dear, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is a masterpiece." She turned to the women clustered nearby. "Clara's making my gown for the cattleman's dinner. I've already seen her work on the redesign, and I guarantee every one of you will be clamoring for her services afterward." The endorsement from such a respected woman sent a visible ripple through the crowd. Clara saw calculations happening behind eyes, social equations being recalculated. She wasn't just Alden Barrett's unexpected bride anymore. She was a skilled craftswoman with the approval of Patricia Harding. Not everyone was pleased by this development. Lucinda Sutton stood near the refreshment table with her usual coterie, her face a mask of forced pleasantness that fooled no one. She'd congratulated Clara and Alden with words so sweet they bordered on sarcastic, her eyes hard as flint. Now she watched the receiving line with barely concealed fury, her grip tight on her punch glass. "She's going to break that glass if she holds it any tighter," Rosa murmured, appearing at Clara's elbow with a plate of cake. "Eat something. You barely touched breakfast, and you'll need your strength for what comes next." "What comes next?" Clara asked, accepting the cake gratefully. "The rest of your life," Rosa said with a slight smile. "Starting with tonight at the ranch, then the cattleman's dinner next week, then every day after that is Mrs. Alden Barrett. Pace yourself." Mrs. Alden Barrett. The name still felt strange in Clara's mind, like a dress she hadn't quite grown into yet. She glanced at Alden, who was deep in conversation with James Crawford about something ranch-related, and felt a flutter of nervousness. They were married now, truly married. Tonight they would return to the ranch together, share a room, begin the intimate reality of being husband and wife. As if sensing her thoughts, Alden looked up and met her eyes. Something warm passed between them. Reassurance, perhaps, or understanding. He excused himself from James and came to her side, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that was already becoming familiar. "Overwhelmed?" he asked quietly. "A little," Clara admitted. "It's all happening so fast. We can slow down if you need to. There's no rush for anything." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Tonight, tomorrow, next week. We'll take it all at whatever pace feels right to you." The consideration in his words eased some of Clara's tension. This was part of why she'd chosen him, she remembered. His respect, his willingness to see her as a person rather than a possession or prize. The afternoon wore on with more congratulations, more cake, more conversations that blurred together in Claire's memory. She met so many people that names and faces became a confused jumble, though she tried desperately to remember them all. These were her neighbors now, the community she'd have to navigate as Alden's wife. It was nearly evening when things finally began winding down. The crowd thinned as families loaded into wagons to head home before dark. Martha and Rosa shooed Clara away when she tried to help clean up, insisting she'd done enough for one day. "Go on," Martha said, hugging her tightly. "Start your new life. We'll handle this." Alden's wagon waited outside, already loaded with Clara's few belongings from the hotel. He helped her up onto the seat, and she was acutely aware of the lingering observers watching them prepare to leave. As Alden swung up beside her and took the reins, someone called out a ribald comment that made Clara's cheeks burn. Laughter followed, good-natured but knowing. They rolled out of Clearwater as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The open road stretched before them, and with each passing mile, Clara felt the tension of the day beginning to ease from her shoulders. Out here, there were no watching eyes, no whispered judgments, just the two of them and the vast Texas landscape. "Thank you," Alden said after they'd been riding in comfortable silence for several minutes. Clara looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For going through with it, for not letting Lucinda Sutton or anyone else drive you away." He kept his eyes on the road, but she could see tension in his jaw. "I know today wasn't easy. All those people staring, judging, weighing whether you measure up." "I've been judged my entire life," Clara said quietly. Today was just louder about it. She paused, then added, "But it was also different. Today, some people looked at me and saw value, real value. That's more than I had in Boston." "You always had value," Alden said firmly. "Some people were just too blind to see it." They crested the rise overlooking Barrett Ranch just as the sun touched the western horizon, flooding the valley with golden light. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where someone, probably Rosa, before she'd left for town, had laid a fire. In the corrals, horses moved like dark silhouettes against the glowing grass. It looked like a painting, Clara thought, like something too beautiful to be real. "Welcome home," Alden said softly. "Home." The words settled into Clara's chest with unexpected weight. This was home now, not the cramped Boston boarding house, not the impersonal hotel room, but this valley, this house, this life she'd chosen with a man she barely knew but was learning to trust. James Crawford emerged from the barn as they pulled up, grinning widely. Behind him, the ranch hands gathered, 10 men of various ages, all looking pleased and slightly awkward. "Congratulations, boss," James said, shaking Alden's hand firmly before turning to Clara. "Mrs. Barrett, welcome to the ranch. The boys and I wanted to be here when you arrived. Make it official-like." "That's very kind," Clara said, touched by the gesture. One of the younger hands stepped forward, hat in his hands, looking nervous. "Ma'am, we just wanted to say, we're real glad the boss found someone. This ranch has needed a woman's touch for a long time. And we heard what you did, standing up to them town folks. That took guts." "Thank you," Clara managed, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I appreciate the welcome." "We'll leave you folks to settle in," James said tactfully. "But if you need anything, we're just across the yard in the bunkhouse. Mrs. Crawford, Rosa, she left supper warming in the oven. Said to tell you there's enough for tomorrow too, so you don't have to worry about cooking right away." The hands dispersed to the bunkhouse, leaving Clara and Alden alone in the gathering dusk. He carried her bags up to the porch, and Clara followed, her heart beating faster as they approached the door. This was the threshold moment, literally crossing into her new life. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Someone had lit lamps throughout the main room, and the fire in the hearth crackled cheerfully. The smell of Rosa's cooking wafted from the kitchen, something with beef and spices that made Clara's stomach remind her she'd barely eaten all day. "Let me show you upstairs," Alden said, picking up her bags again. "You can freshen up while I see to the horses." The master bedroom looked different than it had during her first visit. More lived in, more personal. Someone had put fresh linens on the bed and placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. The late sun streaming through the windows painted everything in warm gold. Alden set her bags down carefully, then turned to face her, his expression serious. Clara, I want you to know. I don't expect anything tonight. I know this is all new and probably overwhelming. We're married legally, but that doesn't mean we have to rush the rest of it. You can take the time you need to feel comfortable. The consideration in his voice made Clara's eyes sting with sudden tears. She'd been bracing herself for demands, for expectations she wasn't sure she was ready to meet. The relief of hearing otherwise was almost overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. I appreciate that more than you know. I'll be downstairs when you're ready. Take your time. He paused at the door, then added, Clara, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're my wife. I know we have a lot to learn about each other, but I think we can build something good. After he'd gone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly shaky. The day's emotions, nervousness, triumph, relief, anticipation, all crashed over her at once. She'd done it. She was married, mistress of Barrett Ranch, beginning a life she'd barely dared to imagine a month ago. She rose and went to the window, looking out over the darkening valley. In the distance, she could see lights from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands were settling in for the evening. Closer, the barn stood solid and dark against the last of the sunset. This was all real. The ranch, the marriage, the future stretching out before her like uncharted territory. Clara changed out of her wedding dress with careful reverence, hanging it in the wardrobe where it glowed like captured moonlight even in the dimming light. She put on a simple house dress and tidied her hair, then made her way downstairs. Alden had set the table and was dishing up Rose's stew when Clara entered the kitchen. He looked up and smiled, a real smile that softened his usually serious face. Perfect timing, he said. I was just about to call up to you. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much conversation. But it was a peaceful quiet, Clara thought, the kind shared by people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. The stew was delicious, rich and warming, exactly what her body needed after the long day. After dinner, they sat in the main room by the fire, and Alden told her stories about the ranch, how he'd built the house stone by stone, how he'd slowly assembled his herd, the harsh winters and dry summers he'd survived. Clara found herself relaxing as she listened, watching the play of firelight across his weathered face. What about you? He asked eventually. What was your life like in Boston, beyond the sewing, I mean? Clara considered the question. Lonely, she said finally. I had work that I loved, but no one to share it with. I'd see my clients building lives, marriages, children, homes, and I was just on the periphery, always watching, never participating. After a while, that isolation starts to hollow you out. I know that feeling, Alden said quietly. The ranch keeps you busy, but busy isn't the same as fulfilled. I could go days without a real conversation, just work and silence. It's part of why I placed that advertisement. I was tired of being alone. Are you disappointed? Clara asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. Now that you've seen me, spent time with me, are you disappointed with what you got? Alden turned to look at her fully, his eyes serious in the firelight. No, he said simply. You're stronger than I expected, more capable. You handled Lucinda Sutton better than I could have. You created a dress that made half the women in Clearwater jealous. You're exactly what this ranch needs, what I need. A partner who can stand on her own but chooses to stand beside me. The words settled into Clara's chest, warm and reassuring. I'm not disappointed either, she said softly. I was afraid you might be all words and no substance, but you're not. You've been kind and patient and respectful. That's worth more than I can say. They talked until the fire burned low, sharing stories and small confidences, building the foundation of understanding that would support their marriage. When Clara finally admitted she was exhausted, Alden banked the fire and walked her upstairs. At the bedroom door, he paused. I'll sleep in one of the other rooms tonight, he said. Give you space to settle in. You don't have to, Clara began. I know, but I want to. He smiled slightly. We have time, Clara. There's no rush for anything. That night, Clara slept in the master bedroom alone, but for the first time since leaving Boston, she didn't feel lonely. She felt safe, valued, seen. It was enough. The next morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sounds of ranch work. Men's voices calling to each other, horses' hooves, the clang of metal on metal. She rose and dressed quickly, braiding her hair in a practical style, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but someone had left the coffee pot warming on the stove and a covered plate with biscuits and jam on the table. A note in Alden's careful handwriting read, "Didn't want to wake you. Help yourself to breakfast. I'll be back around noon." Clara ate standing by the window, watching the ranch come to life in the morning light. This was her domain now, she realized. This house, this kitchen, this life. The thought was both thrilling and intimidating. She spent the morning exploring properly, opening cupboards and drawers, taking inventory of supplies and household goods. The house was well stocked with basics, but lacking in many of the small comforts that made a place feel like home. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, minimal decoration. It was functional, but stark, exactly what one would expect from a bachelor rancher who spent most of his time working. But Clara could see potential. Windows that would benefit from proper curtains, walls that wanted decoration, corners crying out for small touches of beauty. She mentally cataloged what she'd need from town, what she might make herself. She was examining the pathetically empty linen closet when she heard a knock at the front door. Opening it, she found a Mexican woman about her own age, plump and pretty, with a warm smile and curious eyes. "Mrs. Barrett, I'm Maria Reyes. My husband, Diego, works for Mr. Barrett. He's the head wrangler. I wanted to come welcome you properly and see if you needed anything." "Please, come in," Clara said, grateful for the company. "And call me Clara." Maria stepped inside, her eyes immediately taking in the sparse surroundings. "Rosa told me you're a seamstress from Boston. You must think this place needs a lot of work." "It needs a woman's touch," Clara said diplomatically. "But that's to be expected. Mr. Barrett built this house for function, not decoration. Well, if you need help with anything, cleaning, cooking, decorating, you just let me know. The ranch wives, we help each other out. That's how we survive out here." Maria smiled. "And I have to say, that dress you wore yesterday, every woman at the wedding was talking about it. My sister-in-law asked me to find out if you'd be willing to make her daughter's wedding dress." "I would," Clara said, pleased. "Once I'm settled and have finished Mrs. Harding's commission for the cattleman's dinner." "You're making Patricia Harding's dress?" Maria's eyes widened with respect. "That's good business, Clara. Mrs. Harding knows everyone who matters in the ranching community. If she's happy with your work, you'll have more commissions than you can handle." They talked for over an hour, and Clara learned more about ranch life from Maria than she had from anyone else. Maria explained the social dynamics among the ranch hands' families, who was reliable and who was prone to gossip, which women in the valley would be friendly and which would take time to warm up. "What about Lucinda Sutton?" Clara asked finally. "How much damage can she actually do?" Maria's expression turned serious. "Lucinda has influence in town, but less out here on the ranches. Ranch folk are practical. They care more about whether someone can do their job than whether they're fashionable. Still, she's vindictive when crossed. I'd watch your back at the cattleman's dinner. She'll be looking for ways to embarrass you." "I'm not planning to give her any opportunities," Clara said firmly. "Good." Maria stood, preparing to leave. "You've got spine, Clara. That's what this valley needs. Women who won't be pushed around by the Lucinda Suttons of the world." After Maria left, Clara returned to her exploration of the house. In the room Alden had prepared as her sewing studio, she found her supplies exactly where she'd left them during her first visit, plus additional items. More thread in various colors, extra needles, a new pair of shears that must have cost a small fortune. Evidence of Alden's thoughtfulness, his investment in her work. She spent the afternoon beginning Patricia Harding's dress, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of cutting and pinning. The work calmed her, grounded her. This was who she was, not just Alden's wife, but a craftswoman with valuable skills. Alden returned at noon as promised, dusty and tired, but smiling when he found her in the sewing room. "How was your morning?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Productive. I met Maria Reyes, and she was wonderfully helpful. And I've started on Mrs. Harding's dress." Clara gestured to the fabric laid out on her work table. "How was yours?" "Busy. We're moving cattle to the north pasture, which is always an adventure." He paused. Clara, I have to go to Dallas in 3 days for a cattle auction. I'll be gone 2 nights. I hate to leave you alone so soon after the wedding, but it's fine, Clara assured him. This is a working ranch. I understand you have obligations. Rosa offered to stay with you while I'm gone, if you'd like the company. That would be nice, Clara admitted. I'm not quite ready to be completely alone out here yet. They fell into a rhythm over the next few days that felt surprisingly natural. Alden rose before dawn to work with the ranch hands, returned for lunch, then went back out until evening. Clara worked on Patricia's dress, explored the house and grounds, and slowly began making the space her own. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. On the third night, the night before Alden was to leave for Dallas, Clara found him in his study, a small room off the main living area that she hadn't fully explored yet. He looked up from the ledger he was reviewing, his expression welcoming. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. "Never. Come in." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "I was just reviewing the ranch accounts, trying to project whether we'll need to sell more cattle this fall, or if we can hold back and wait for better prices in spring." "May I see?" Clara asked, curious. Alden looked surprised but pushed the ledger toward her. "It's not particularly interesting reading." Clara studied the columns of numbers, her seamstress's eye for detail serving her well. She could see the patterns: income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and equipment, wages for the hands. The ranch was profitable, but not extravagantly so. Every penny was reinvested in growth. "You're building toward something," she observed. "Not just maintaining, but expanding." "I want Barrett Ranch to be one of the premier operations in Texas," Alden said. "That takes capital, careful management, and patience. But yes, I'm building toward something bigger." "What will you do when you achieve it?" Clara asked. "When the ranch is as successful as you want it to be?" Alden leaned back in his chair, considering. "Enjoy it, I suppose. Maybe travel, see some of the world beyond Texas. Build something lasting that can be passed down." He paused, then added quietly, "Build a family if we're blessed with children." The mention of children sent a flutter through Clara's stomach, anticipation mixed with nervousness. They hadn't yet consummated their marriage, had barely moved beyond chaste goodnight kisses. But the implication was clear. Eventually, their relationship would deepen into full intimacy. "I'd like children," Clara said softly. "Someday. When we're ready." "When you're ready," Alden corrected gently. "This all moves at your pace, Clara. I meant what I said on our wedding night." The next morning, Alden left for Dallas before dawn. Clara stood on the porch watching his wagon disappear into the early morning darkness, feeling unexpectedly bereft. They'd been married less than a week, but already his presence had become a comfort. Rosa arrived mid-morning with her belongings and a determined expression. "Right," she said, surveying the house. "James is gone, you're alone, and we have 2 days to make this place look less like a bachelor's quarters and more like a home. Where do we start?" They spent the next 2 days in a flurry of domestic activity. Rosa taught Clara the intricacies of the ranch kitchen's temperamental stove. They made curtains from fabric Clara had purchased weeks ago, but hadn't yet found time to sew. They rearranged furniture, beat rugs, and thoroughly cleaned every corner of the house. In the evenings, they worked on Patricia Harding's dress together, Rosa's steady hands helping with the detailed work. And they talked about marriage, about ranch life, about the upcoming cattleman's dinner. "Lucinda will try something," Rosa warned. "She can't directly attack you now that you're married to Alden, but she'll look for indirect ways to undermine you. A cutting comment disguised as concern, a subtle insult that sounds like a compliment." "I've dealt with worse in Boston fitting rooms," Claire said. "At least here I have allies." "You do," Rosa confirmed. "Patricia Harding, Maria, and the other ranch wives, me and James, the ranch hands. We're all on your side. But you need to understand something, Clara. The cattleman's dinner isn't just a social event. It's where deals are made, alliances formed, reputations established. How you present yourself there will affect Alden's business relationships." "No pressure, then," Clara said wryly. "You'll be fine," Rosa assured her. "You've already proven you can handle pressure. Just be yourself, capable, dignified, and skilled. That's all you need to be." Alden returned from Dallas on the evening of the second day. looking tired but satisfied. He'd secured good prices on the cattle he'd sold and established promising contacts for future business. Clara found herself genuinely glad to see him, welcoming him home with a warmth that surprised her. "The house looks different," he said, looking around the main room. "Good different. Warmer." "Rosa and I have been busy," Clara admitted. "I hope you don't mind the changes." "Mind? Clara, this is your home now. Change whatever you want. Make it feel like yours." He paused, then added, "I'm glad you were here when I got back. It's nice having someone to come home to." The week passed quickly, and suddenly it was the evening before the cattleman's dinner. Patricia Harding's dress was finished and delivered, the older woman exclaiming with delight over the transformation Clara had achieved with the salvaged silk. Clara's own dress for the dinner hung ready in her wardrobe, a deep blue wool she'd made from fabric Mrs. Chen had ordered specially, cut to flatter Clara's figure and showcase her skill without being ostentatious. That night, lying in bed, still sleeping alone, though Alden's room was just down the hall, Clara found herself surprisingly calm. She'd faced Lucinda Sutton before and survived. She'd proven her worth to Alden, to the ranch hands, to herself. Tomorrow would be just another test, and she'd pass it the same way she'd passed all the others, with dignity, skill, and the quiet strength she'd spent a lifetime developing. The morning of the cattleman's dinner dawned gray and cool, with clouds gathering on the horizon. Clara rose early and went through her preparations with methodical care. She arranged her hair in a style that was elegant but not fussy, applied just enough powder to smooth her complexion, and dressed in her blue wool with careful attention to every detail. When she came downstairs, Alden was waiting in his own formal wear, a well-cut suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Clara," he breathed, "you look stunning." "I look presentable," she corrected, but she couldn't help smiling at his obvious admiration. "You look like exactly what you are, a skilled craftswoman and capable rancher's wife." He offered his arm. "Ready to face the lions?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Clara said, taking his arm. The dinner was being held at the Cattlemen's Association Hall in Dallas, a 2-hour journey by wagon. They arrived in late afternoon to find the building already bustling with activity. Ranchers in formal wear congregated outside, smoking cigars and discussing cattle prices. Inside, women in expensive dresses clustered in small groups, their voices creating a hum of conversation that reminded Clara uncomfortably of Boston society events. Patricia Harding spotted them immediately and swept over, magnificent in the burgundy dress Clara had redesigned. Several other women followed in her wake, clearly curious. "Alden, Clara, wonderful to see you." Patricia took Clara's hand warmly. "Everyone, this is Clara Barrett, the seamstress I was telling you about. She's the one who created this dress from that disaster I showed you." The women examined Clara with frank interest, not the cutting assessment Lucinda Sutton had subjected her to, but genuine curiosity mixed with respect. Clara found herself fielding questions about her work, her methods, her rates. Several women asked if she'd be willing to take commissions. "I'm establishing my business now," Clara said. "I'd be happy to discuss projects with anyone interested." Across the room, she caught sight of Lucinda Sutton, stunning in pale gold silk, surrounded by her usual coterie. Lucinda's eyes met Clara's, and something cold and calculating passed between them. The battle lines were drawn. Dinner was an elaborate affair, multiple courses served with military precision, wine flowing freely, conversation growing louder as the evening progressed. Clara found herself seated between Alden and an older rancher named Thomas Westfield, who proved surprisingly easy to talk to. "So you're the bride everyone's been discussing," Westfield said. "The seamstress from Boston who married Barrett and scandalized half of Clearwater." "I didn't intend to scandalize anyone," Clara said mildly. "I simply answered an advertisement and married the man who placed it. The best decision Barrett ever made, from what I hear. Patricia Harding can't stop singing your praises." Westfield smiled. "And Patricia's not easily impressed. If she says you're skilled, you're skilled." After dinner, the men retired to discuss business, while the women gathered in the adjacent parlor for coffee and conversation. This was the moment Clara had been dreading, trapped in a room full of ranchers' wives, many of whom would be measuring her against Lucinda Sutton's poison. She entered the parlor to find women clustered in small groups, conversations pausing as they noticed her arrival. Patricia Harding immediately beckoned her over to a group near the fireplace. "Ladies, you must meet Clara Barrett properly. Clara, this is Eleanor Westfield, Catherine Morrison, and Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter-in-law from the dry goods store." The women greeted Clara with varying degrees of warmth. Eleanor Westfield, Thomas's wife, was genuinely friendly. Catherine Morrison seemed reserved but not hostile. Sarah Chen smiled with recognition. "Mother told me about you," Sarah said. "She said you were the best seamstress she'd seen in 20 years. "That's very kind," Clara murmured, unused to such direct praise. "It's not kindness, it's truth." Patricia sipped her coffee. "I've commissioned gowns from seamstresses in Boston, New York, and San Francisco. Your work rivals any of them. You have a gift for understanding how fabric should move on a real woman's body, not just a fashion plate." The conversation flowed easily after that, women asking Clara about Boston, about her journey west, about her first impressions of Texas. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, realizing that not everyone in this room was an enemy. Many were simply curious, open to forming their own opinions rather than accepting Lucinda's version of events. But then Lucinda herself glided over, her smile bright and sharp as broken glass. "Mrs. Barrett," she said sweetly, "how wonderful that you're integrating so well into our community. I was just telling Eleanor how impressed we all were by your wedding dress. So brave of you to make your own rather than purchasing something fashionable from a proper dressmaker." The insult was carefully wrapped in compliment, but Clara heard it clearly. The suggestion that making one's own dress was somehow inferior, that Clara couldn't afford or didn't have access to proper fashion. "I am a proper dressmaker," Clara said calmly. "I've been sewing professionally for 12 years. Making my own wedding dress seemed natural." "Of course," Lucinda cooed. "I simply meant that most brides prefer to be dressed by someone else on their wedding day. But I suppose when one has your particular skills, it makes sense to save money where you can." "Actually," Patricia interjected smoothly, "hiring a seamstress of Clara's caliber would cost far more than purchasing a ready-made dress. Her skills are exceptional. That's why I commissioned her to create my gown for this evening." Lucinda's smile froze. Her eyes flicked to Patricia's dress, which she'd clearly noticed but perhaps not realized was Clara's work, and something ugly flashed across her face. "How interesting," she managed. "I didn't realize you were taking commissions so soon, Mrs. Barrett. One would think you'd want to focus on settling into ranch life first." "I can do both," Clara said evenly. "My work is important to me. Alden understands and supports that." "How modern of him." Lucinda's voice had taken on an edge now, the sweetness wearing thin. "Though I wonder if he fully understands what it means to have a wife who's more interested in her sewing than in her wifely duties." The room had gone very quiet. Several women looked shocked by the barely veiled impropriety of Lucinda's comment. Even Eleanor, one of Lucinda's friends, looked uncomfortable. Clara took a careful breath, aware that every eye in the room was on her, that how she handled this moment would define her position in this community. "I wonder," Clara said clearly, "why you're so concerned with my marriage, Miss Sutton. Alden and I are quite satisfied with our arrangement. We respect each other's work and support each other's goals. That seems like a healthy foundation for any partnership." "I'm simply concerned for Alden's well-being," Lucinda said, her voice rising slightly. "He's an important man in this community, and his choice of wife reflects on all of us." "Then you should be pleased," Patricia said sharply. "Clara's already proven herself to be skilled, dignified, and gracious under pressure. Those qualities reflect very well indeed." "Do they?" Lucinda's composure was cracking now, fury bleeding through the social mask. "Or do they simply reflect desperation? A woman who'll do anything to secure a wealthy husband, even pretending to be something she's not." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Clara felt rage surge through her veins, but she forced herself to remain calm, to keep her voice steady. "I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am," she said quietly. "A seamstress, a working woman, someone who values skill and dignity over social position. If that threatens you, Miss Sutton, perhaps you should examine why." Lucinda's face flushed with fury. "How dare you?" "Ladies." A new voice cut through the tension, an older woman Clara didn't recognize, elegant and commanding in black silk. I think we've all forgotten ourselves. This is supposed to be a social occasion, not a battlefield. The woman was Mrs. Adelaide Montgomery, Clara learned later, the widow of one of Texas's most influential ranchers and the unofficial matriarch of the ranching community. When she spoke, people listened. Miss Sutton, Mrs. Montgomery continued, her voice cool. Your concern for Mr. Barrett is noted but unnecessary. He's a grown man capable of choosing his own wife. Mrs. Barrett, she turned to Clara, I'd very much like to discuss a commission with you. My granddaughter is getting married in the spring, and I believe your skills would be perfect for her trousseau. The endorsement from someone of Mrs. Montgomery's stature was unmistakable. Around the room, Clara saw women reassessing, social calculations shifting. Lucinda, recognizing her defeat, made some excuse and retreated to the far side of the parlor, her coterie trailing behind her like chastened ducklings. Patricia squeezed Clara's hand. Well done, she murmured. You handled that perfectly. But Clara's hands were shaking as she accepted a fresh cup of coffee. She'd won this battle, but she knew with absolute certainty that the war with Lucinda Sutton wasn't over. It was only beginning. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and careful social navigation. Clara found herself surrounded by ranchers' wives eager to discuss commissions, their interest clearly sparked by both Patricia Harding's endorsement and Mrs. Montgomery's public approval. By the time the men rejoined them from their business discussions, Clara had preliminary agreements for 5 new projects and a growing realization that she might actually succeed in building a seamstress business in Texas. Alden found her near the refreshment table, deep in conversation with Catherine Morrison about a dress for Catherine's daughter's debut. He waited patiently until they'd finished, then touched Clara's elbow gently. Ready to go home? He asked quietly. You look exhausted. Clara was exhausted. The emotional toll of confronting Lucinda had drained her more than she'd realized. Yes, please. They made their farewells, and Clara noticed the difference in how people responded to her now compared to when they'd arrived. More warmth, more respect, more genuine interest. She'd passed some invisible test, proven herself worthy of acceptance in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with her conduct under pressure. The wagon ride home was dark and cool, with stars spreading across the sky like scattered diamonds. They'd been riding in comfortable silence for nearly an hour when Alden finally spoke. I heard what happened with Lucinda, he said. 6 people felt compelled to tell me about it during the business discussion. They seemed to think I should know that my wife had been publicly attacked. Clara's stomach tightened with anxiety. Are you angry? Angry? Alden sounded surprised. Why would I be angry with you? Because I caused a scene. Because I didn't just let her comments pass. Because you defended yourself with dignity and intelligence? Alden interrupted. Clara, I'm not angry. I'm proud. You handled Lucinda better than I could have. You didn't sink to her level, didn't respond with cruelty, but you also didn't let her walk over you. That takes strength. She's not going to stop, Clara said quietly. Tonight was humiliating for her, being corrected in front of the entire community, having Mrs. Montgomery side with me. She'll want revenge. Probably, Alden agreed. But she'll find it harder now. You've won allies tonight, Clara. Real ones. Patricia Harding, Mrs. Montgomery, the other ranchers' wives. They're not going to tolerate Lucinda's games the way Clearwater society does. Out here, among ranching families, capability matters more than beauty or social position. Clara wanted to believe him, but years of being underestimated had taught her caution. Still, she couldn't deny that tonight had been a victory. She'd walked into that room as the questionable mail-order bride and left as a respected craftswoman with a growing business. That was worth something. They arrived at the ranch well past midnight to find James had waited up, keeping the house warm and lit against their return. He took one look at Clara's exhausted face and immediately offered to see to the horses. You get Mrs. Barrett inside and settled, he told Alden. I'll handle everything out here. In the house, Clara climbed the stairs, feeling like her legs were made of lead. Alden followed, carrying her shawl and reticule, his presence steady and reassuring. At her bedroom door, he paused. Clara, may I come in for a moment? There's something I want to say. She nodded, suddenly nervous, and preceded him into the room. He closed the door behind them, then turned to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "We've been married 2 weeks now," he began, "and I've been sleeping in the guest room because I wanted to give you time to adjust, to feel comfortable. But Clara, I need to know, is this arrangement what you want permanently, or is this just temporary until you're ready for a real marriage?" Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She'd known this conversation was coming, had felt it building with each passing night. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want a real marriage," Alden said honestly. "Not immediately, not before you're ready, but eventually. I want to share a room with my wife, share a bed. I want the intimacy and partnership that goes beyond separate sleeping arrangements, but only if that's what you want too." Clara studied his face, seeing vulnerability there beneath the usual steadiness. He was risking rejection, asking for something she might not be ready to give. The realization that he could be uncertain too, that he wasn't completely confident in her regard, made something shift in her chest. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Not of you specifically, but of disappointing you, of not being enough in that way, the same way I've never been enough in every other way." Alden crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands in his grip warm and firm. "Clara, listen to me. You are enough. More than enough. You're intelligent, skilled, brave, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with conventional standards. And yes, I find you attractive. Very attractive. But more than that, I respect you. I like you. I enjoy your company. That's what makes a marriage work, not some fantasy of physical perfection." "You really believe that?" Clara whispered. "I know that." He lifted one hand to cup her face gently. "May I kiss you? Really kiss you? Not just the polite pecks we've been sharing?" Clara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. Alden leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it wasn't the chaste press of their wedding kiss, but something deeper, more searching. His hand slid into her hair, loosening pins, and Clara found herself leaning into him, her own hands gripping his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alden rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going back to my room now," he said quietly. "Because if I stay, I won't want to leave. And I don't think either of us is ready for that tonight. But soon, Clara. When you're ready, tell me. I'll be waiting." He left, and Clara sank onto her bed, her entire body trembling with a mixture of desire and relief and something that felt dangerously close to love. She'd married Alden expecting respect and security, but she was starting to realize she might get something far more precious, genuine partnership, possibly even happiness. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Clara divided her time between household management, her growing seamstress business, and learning the complexities of ranch life. Maria Reyes became a regular visitor, teaching Clara everything from how to can vegetables to which ranch wives were trustworthy and which were prone to gossip. Rosa came every few days, usually bringing some new piece of ranch wisdom or a story about the hands that made Clara laugh. The commissions from the cattleman's dinner materialized into actual work. Catherine Morrison brought fabric for her daughter's debut dress. Mrs. Montgomery arrived in an impressive carriage with detailed specifications for her granddaughter's trousseau. 2 other ranchers' wives commissioned everyday dresses, and one asked Clara to remake an inherited gown that no longer fit properly. Clara threw herself into the work with passionate focus, transforming the sewing room into a proper workshop. She created a system for tracking commissions, ordered additional supplies from Mrs. Chen, and even hired Sarah Chen part-time to help with basic finishing work on simpler projects. Her business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But more than the professional success, Clara found herself settling into the personal aspects of her new life. She learned Alden's preferences, how he liked his coffee, that he read for an hour before bed, that he had a wry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed. She discovered the ranch's rhythms, understanding when Alden would be busy with cattle and when he'd be available for conversation. She made the house truly hers, adding curtains and rugs and small decorative touches that transformed it from bachelor quarters into a home. And slowly, carefully, their physical relationship deepened. A week after the cattleman's dinner, Clara invited Alden to stay in her room rather than retreating to his own. That first night was awkward and tender, both of them nervous, but it was also honest and gradually satisfying. They learned each other with patience and care, building intimacy at a pace that felt right for both of them. 3 weeks after that, Alden moved his belongings into the master bedroom permanently. They were truly married now, in every sense, partners in work, in home, in bed. Clara woke each morning to his solid warmth beside her and fell asleep each night to the sound of his breathing. It wasn't the dramatic romance of novels, but it was real and growing and deeply satisfying. But the peace couldn't last forever. In early November, Martha Miller sent word that Lucinda Sutton had been making renewed efforts to undermine Clara's reputation in Clearwater. Nothing direct, Lucinda had learned that lesson. But subtle campaigns of doubt, suggestions that Clara was taking advantage of Alden's good nature, implications that the ranch was suffering because Clara distracted him from his work, whispers that Clara's business was inappropriate for a rancher's wife, that she should be focusing on household duties rather than commerce. It's nonsense, of course, Martha's letter assured Clara. Anyone with eyes can see that the ranch is more prosperous than ever, and that you and Alden are genuinely suited. But Lucinda's persistent, and she still has influence in town. I thought you should know. Clara showed the letter to Alden that evening. He read it with a darkening expression, then set it aside with controlled anger. I'm going to the Sutton house tomorrow, he said flatly. This has gone on long enough. If Lucinda won't leave you alone voluntarily, I'll make it clear that continued harassment will have consequences. No, Clara said firmly. That's exactly what she wants, to force you into a position where you look like a bully, attacking a young woman for expressing innocent concerns, or Marguerite, it makes her the victim and us the aggressors. Then what do you suggest? Alden's frustration was evident. We can't just let her continue poisoning people against you. We don't have to. We just need to make the truth impossible to ignore. Clara's mind was already working, planning. The ranch's success speaks for itself. My business is thriving with the support of the most respected women in the ranching community. Our marriage is solid. Those are facts, Alden. Facts that contradict everything Lucinda's trying to suggest. So we do nothing. Alden sounded incredulous. We do something very strategic. We host a gathering here at the ranch, not a formal party. That would look like we're trying too hard. Just a casual Sunday afternoon event, inviting the ranchers' families from the area. Let them see the ranch, see us together, see that everything Lucinda's saying is fiction. Clara warmed to her plan as she spoke. People believe what they see with their own eyes more than what they hear through gossip. We show them the truth, and Lucinda's lies lose power. Alden studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You're devious when you want to be. I like it. I learned from the best, Boston society women who could destroy reputations with a carefully placed comment and rebuild them just as quickly with the right gesture. Lucinda thinks she's skilled at social warfare, but she's playing with amateur tactics. I grew up watching professionals. They spent the next 2 weeks planning and preparing. Alden warned the ranch hands about the upcoming gathering, and the men threw themselves into making the ranch look its absolute best. Corrals were repaired and whitewashed. The barn was organized to military precision. The approach to the house was cleared and smoothed. James even convinced the hands to construct additional seating areas in the yard, anticipating that many guests would prefer to gather outside. Clara worked with Rosa and Maria to plan refreshments. Nothing too elaborate, but enough to demonstrate hospitality. Simple sandwiches, fresh bread, several types of pie, coffee, and lemonade. Food that suggested welcome without ostentation. She also made sure to have several works in progress visible in her sewing room, not displayed ostentatiously, but naturally present, evidence of her thriving business. Mrs. Montgomery's granddaughter's trousseau, carefully draped on dress forms. Catherine Morrison's daughter's debut gown, nearly finished. The everyday practical work that comprised most of her commissions, all of it testament to her skill and industry. Invitations went out to 20 ranching families in the valley. Most accepted immediately. A few sent polite regrets with genuine-sounding excuses. But the Hardings accepted, as did the Westfields, the Morrisons, and most importantly, Mrs. Adelaide Montgomery herself. With those names on the guest list, Clara knew other families would attend simply to maintain their own social standing. The Suttons were pointedly not invited. Clara knew this would fuel Lucinda's fury, but it also made a statement. The Suttons were not essential to the Barretts' social circle. Clearwater society might revolve around Lucinda, but ranching society had different centers of power. The Sunday before the gathering, Clara was in town with Alden collecting final supplies when they encountered Lucinda outside the general store. The other woman's expression when she saw them was a mixture of fury and something that might have been desperation. "Alden," she called, stepping directly into their path. "I need to speak with you, privately." "Anything you need to say can be said in front of my wife," Alden said coolly. "It's about your reputation, about what people are saying." Lucinda's voice had taken on an urgent quality. "You need to understand that Clara's commercial activities are reflecting poorly on you. A rancher of your status shouldn't have a wife in trade. It's unseemly." "Clara's business is profitable, respectable, and entirely appropriate," Alden said. "What's unseemly is your continued campaign to undermine her. Consider this your final warning, Lucinda. If this behavior continues, I will discuss your conduct with your father. I imagine he'll be interested to know that his daughter is jeopardizing his banking relationships with half the ranchers in this valley." Lucinda's face went white. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Alden said flatly. "I've been patient because I thought you'd eventually accept reality. But my patience has limits. Clara is my wife. She has my complete support. Nothing you say or do will change that. The only thing you're accomplishing is making yourself look petty and vindictive." He guided Clara past Lucinda, who stood frozen on the walkway, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Clara glanced back once and saw genuine distress on the other woman's face. Not just anger, but something like pain. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for Lucinda. Almost. The day of the gathering dawned clear and beautiful, with November sunshine warming the air to a comfortable temperature. The ranch looked magnificent. Every building freshly maintained, the valley's natural beauty on full display, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. It looked like the prosperous, well-managed operation it was. Guests began arriving just after noon, wagons rolling up the valley road in a steady stream. The Westfields came first, Thomas and Eleanor bringing their 3 grown children. The Morrisons followed, Catherine's daughter excitedly telling Clara how much she loved her nearly finished dress. The Hardings, Mrs. Montgomery and her impressive carriage, the Reyes family, the Chens, families Clara had met over the past months, plus others she was meeting for the first time. By 2 o'clock, the ranch yard was filled with people. Men discussing cattle and land management with Alden and James, women examining the house and asking Clara about her decorating choices, children running and playing under the watchful eyes of older siblings. It was exactly the atmosphere Clara had hoped for, casual, welcoming, giving people a chance to see the ranch and the Barrett marriage in their natural context. Mrs. Montgomery asked for a tour of Clara's sewing room, and Clara found herself leading a group of 6 women upstairs. They examined her works in progress with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about technique and construction. "You've built something impressive here," Mrs. Montgomery observed, studying the careful organization of Clara's workspace. "A professional operation, not just dabbling. That takes real commitment and skill." "Sewing is what I am," Clara said simply. "It seemed wrong to give that up just because I married. Alden understood that." "Not many men would," Catherine Morrison said. "Most want their wives focused entirely on domestic duties." "Most men don't value partnership the way Alden does," Clara countered. "He sees my work as an asset to our household, not a distraction from it. The income helps fund ranch improvements. The connections help build his business relationships. We support each other's success." "That's how a good marriage should work," Mrs. Montgomery said firmly. "My late husband and I operated that way for 40 years. He ran the cattle operation, I managed everything else, the household, the accounts, even some land purchases. We were partners, not just husband and wife. That's what builds lasting success." The endorsement from such a respected figure made several other women nod in agreement. Clara could see opinions shifting, people understanding her situation in a new context. She wasn't a wife neglecting her duties. She was a partner contributing to a joint enterprise. As the afternoon progressed, Clara found herself relaxing into genuine enjoyment. These weren't Boston society women who saw her as hired help, and they weren't Clearwater residents poisoned by Lucinda's gossip. They were practical ranch wives who valued capability and contribution. Several mentioned having items they'd like commissioned. One asked if Clara would consider teaching sewing classes for young women in the valley. Another inquired whether Clara might be interested in partnership on a dressmaking supply business based between the ranch and Dallas. These were opportunities Clara had never dreamed of in Boston. Real respect, genuine business prospects, community integration. She was building something here, she realized. Not just a marriage or a household, but a life. A real life with purpose and connection. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, guests started preparing to leave, offering thanks and invitations to visit their own ranches. Thomas Westfield clapped Alden on the shoulder and declared it the finest gathering he'd attended in years. Catherine Morrison hugged Clara and whispered that she was exactly what the valley needed. Mrs. Montgomery's departure was more formal, but she pressed Clara's hand warmly and told her she'd done her late husband proud with the quality of the trousseau work. After the last wagon had rolled away and the ranch hands had dispersed to evening chores, Clara and Alden stood together on the porch, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. "That was a success," Alden said quietly, his arm around Clara's waist. "It was exactly what we needed," Clara agreed. "Now when Lucinda tries to spread doubts, people will have their own experiences to contradict her. They've seen the ranch, seen us together, seen my work. That's more powerful than any gossip." "You're brilliant, you know that?" Alden turned her to face him, his eyes warm in the fading light. "I thought I was marrying a skilled seamstress and getting a capable household manager. I didn't realize I was getting a strategic genius." Clara laughed, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "I'm not a genius. I'm just someone who learned how to survive in hostile environments. Boston society taught me that the truth, properly presented, is more powerful than any lie. Well, whatever you want to call it, it worked." Alden kissed her gently. "Come on, let's go inside. I'm exhausted, and I suspect you are too." That night, lying in bed with Alden's arm around her, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not just absence of unhappiness, but genuine satisfaction with her life. She had work she loved, a home she'd made her own, a husband who respected and valued her, and a growing network of genuine friends and allies. The war with Lucinda Sutton wasn't necessarily over, but it no longer mattered as much. Clara had built something real here, something that couldn't be destroyed by gossip or social manipulation. She'd found her place. 2 weeks later, Martha sent another letter, this one filled with surprising news. Lucinda Sutton had suddenly announced her engagement to a banker's son from Dallas and would be moving there after the wedding. The speed of the engagement suggested it had been arranged, possibly by her father, as a way to extract her from an increasingly untenable social situation in Clearwater. "Everyone's relieved," Martha wrote. "Lucinda's been difficult for years, but no one wanted to be the first to say so. Now that she's leaving, people are practically celebrating. The general store owner told me yesterday that business has been more pleasant in the last week than it's been in years. You did us all a favor by refusing to be intimidated." Clara showed the letter to Alden, who read it with grim satisfaction. "I should feel sorry for the poor bastard in Dallas who's getting her," he said. "But mostly, I'm just relieved she'll be someone else's problem." "I hope she's happy," Clara said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. "I hope she finds whatever it is she's been searching for, because all that cruelty came from somewhere, some deep dissatisfaction or pain. Maybe leaving Clearwater will give her a chance to be someone different." "You're more generous than she deserves," Alden observed. "Maybe, but I can afford to be generous now. She can't hurt me anymore." Clara folded the letter carefully. "Besides, I'm too busy to waste energy on old enemies. Mrs. Montgomery's granddaughter wants to add 2 more dresses to her trousseau. Catherine Morrison's daughter wants a matching ensemble for some social event. And I have 3 new inquiries from families I met at the gathering. I'm going to need to hire additional help just to keep up." "Hire whoever you need," Alden said. "Your business is thriving, Clara. You should enjoy that success." As winter settled over the valley, Clara did exactly that. She hired 2 young women from town as apprentices, teaching them basic techniques while reserving the detailed work for herself. Sarah Chen increased her hours, proving invaluable for managing the growing business. Clara established regular work hours. setting boundaries that allowed her to balance her professional work with her roles as ranch wife and household manager. The commissions kept coming, not just from the immediate area, but from Dallas and even Fort Worth, as word spread about the skilled seamstress operating out of Barrett Ranch. Clara raised her rates, partly out of necessity given the demand and partly as a statement of her worth. Women paid without complaint, recognizing that quality work commanded quality prices. By Christmas, Clara's seamstress business was profitable enough to contribute significantly to the ranch's operating capital. She and Alden sat together one evening in December, reviewing accounts and planning for the coming year. "If I invest these earnings back into the ranch," Alden said slowly, studying the figures, "we could expand the herd by 20% next spring. That would mean more hands, more work, but significantly more profit within 2 years." "Do it," Clara said without hesitation. "My business will continue generating income. We can afford the risk." "We," Alden repeated, something warm in his voice. "I like how that sounds. We're really building this together, aren't we?" "That was always the plan," Claire reminded him. "Partnership? That's what you offered in your letters, and that's what we've created." Christmas was small but meaningful, just the two of them, plus James and Rosa for Christmas dinner. They exchanged modest gifts. Alden gave Clara a beautiful set of German sewing scissors she'd been coveting. Clara gave him a shirt she'd made, carefully tailored to his frame, in fabric she'd special ordered from Boston. They attended Christmas services in Clearwater, where people greeted them warmly, without the undercurrent of judgment that had characterized Clara's early weeks in town. Lucinda Sutton was notably absent, having already moved to Dallas. Without her presence, Clearwater's social atmosphere had relaxed considerably. People were friendlier, less concerned with social hierarchies and arbitrary standards. Clara found herself actually enjoying trips to town, chatting with shopkeepers and ranch wives without the constant awareness of being assessed. As winter turned toward spring, Clara realized with some surprise that she'd been in Texas for 6 months. Half a year since she'd stepped off that train to mockery and whispers. Half a year since Alden Barrett had looked past Clearwater's judgment and seen her worth. In that time, she'd built a life beyond anything she'd imagined in Boston. In March, Clara missed her monthly courses and realized with a mixture of nervousness and joy what that might mean. She waited another month to be certain, then told Alden one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the spring sunset. "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Alden went very still, then turned to look at her with an expression of wonder mixed with concern. "You think? Or you know?" "I'm fairly certain. I've missed 2 months now, and I've been feeling nauseous in the mornings. I should probably see a doctor to confirm, but—" She trailed off, uncertain how he'd react. "Clara." Alden took her hands in his grip gentle but firm. "This is wonderful news. Are you happy about it?" "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "But yes, I'm happy, I think. It's all happening so fast. The marriage, the business, and now this. But yes, I'm happy." "So am I." Alden pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her carefully, as if she might break. "We're going to have a family, Clara, a real family. That's more than I ever hoped for when I placed that advertisement." They told Rosa and James first, then gradually spread the news to their wider community. The response was overwhelmingly positive, ranch wives offering advice and assistance, Mrs. Montgomery sending a substantial gift of baby linens, even Martha Miller writing to offer her congratulations and support. Clara found herself surrounded by women eager to help, to share their own experiences, to welcome her into yet another aspect of Valley life. She continued her seamstress work throughout the pregnancy, modifying her schedule as needed, but refusing to completely abandon her business. Her apprentices proved invaluable, taking on more responsibility as Clara's energy waned in the later months. She designed and sewed baby clothes during the quiet hours, her hands moving with practiced precision even as her body changed and grew. In October, exactly 1 year after the cattleman's dinner where Clara had faced down Lucinda Sutton, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, but Rosa and Maria stayed with her throughout, along with the doctor from Clearwater. Alden paced the hallway, driven half mad by Clara's cries but forbidden from the room by firm female authority. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with a strong voice and a surprising amount of dark hair, they brought Alden in to meet his daughter. He took the tiny bundle with trembling hands, his weathered face soft with wonder. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." They named her Catherine, after Catherine Morrison, who'd been one of Clara's first supporters, with Adelaide as a middle name in honor of Mrs. Montgomery. Catherine Adelaide Barrett, a name that suggested both the new life she represented and the community that had welcomed her mother. As Clara recovered from childbirth over the following weeks, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she'd been an invisible seamstress in Boston, overlooked and undervalued, working herself to exhaustion for women who barely acknowledged her existence. Now she lay in her own home, surrounded by friends, holding her daughter, with a husband who genuinely loved and respected her. The transformation wasn't just in her circumstances, but in herself. She'd learned to stand up for her worth, to demand respect rather than hoping for scraps of it. She'd discovered that strength wasn't about conforming to others' expectations, but about knowing her own value and refusing to diminish it. In December, they hosted a gathering to introduce Catherine to the Valley community, a smaller version of the previous year's successful event. People came bearing gifts and good wishes, admiring the baby and congratulating the proud parents. Even Mrs. Chen made the journey from town, bringing a beautiful handmade quilt. "You've done well for yourself, Clara," the older woman said, studying Catherine with approval. "Built a good life here. That takes courage." "It took finding the right partner," Clara corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Maybe not, but plenty of women find the right partner and still don't build what you've built. You've created a business, a home, a family, and a place for yourself in this community. That's all you, Clara. Don't sell yourself short." As winter settled in again, Clara gradually resumed her seamstress work on a limited basis. She wouldn't take on as many commissions as before. Catherine needed her attention, and she refused to sacrifice her daughter's care for professional success. But she also refused to completely abandon the work that gave her such satisfaction and independence. Balance, she was learning, was possible if you were willing to establish boundaries and defend them. Sarah Chen took on increased responsibility, essentially managing the day-to-day operations while Clara handled design work and the most intricate sewing. The apprentices she'd trained proved capable of handling standard commissions under Sarah's supervision. The business continued thriving, though at a pace that allowed Clara to also embrace motherhood. In February, nearly 2 years after Clara had first arrived in Clearwater, Martha wrote with news that made Clara laugh out loud. Lucinda Sutton had returned to town for a brief visit, heavily pregnant herself and looking considerably less polished than she had during her reign as Clearwater's social queen. She'd inquired after Clara, asking Martha how the seamstress business was faring. "I told her you were thriving," Martha wrote, "that you had more business than you could handle, a beautiful daughter, and a marriage that was the envy of half the valley." She looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Then she asked, and I swear this is true, whether you might have time to make some baby clothes for her, since she'd heard you were the best seamstress in 3 counties. I told her I'd pass along the inquiry, but that your schedule was quite full. Clara showed the letter to Alden, who read it with raised eyebrows. "Are you going to take the commission?" Clara thought about it for a long moment. 2 years ago, she would have refused out of spite or fear, but she wasn't that person anymore. She'd outgrown the need to prove anything to Lucinda Sutton. "I'll do it," she decided, not because I owe her anything or because I'm trying to prove I'm the bigger person, but because sewing baby clothes is one of my favorite things, and I do good work. Her baby deserves to have beautiful clothes regardless of who her mother is. I'll charge my standard rates and I'll do the work professionally. Nothing more, nothing less. She sent word through Martha that she'd accept the commission, and a week later a package arrived with fabric, measurements, and a brief note in Lucinda's elegant handwriting. "Thank you for your generosity. I was wrong about many things. I hope motherhood brings you joy." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Clara accepted it for what it was, a small gesture from a woman who'd perhaps learned her own difficult lessons, and set to work creating the most beautiful baby layettes she'd ever made. When she sent them back to Dallas, she included a note of her own. "May your child be blessed with love and acceptance. Every baby deserves that." Spring arrived again, bringing with it the renewal of life across the valley. Clara stood on the porch one morning in April, Catherine on her hip, watching Alden and the hands work with the new calves. The valley was green with spring grass, the morning air was sweet with wildflowers, and the ranch stretched out before her like a promise fulfilled. She thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived in Clearwater, nervous, defensive, braced for rejection. That woman had needed to prove her worth at every turn, to defend her right to exist in spaces that didn't want her. This woman, the one she'd become, knew her worth without needing constant validation. She'd built a life based on genuine respect and partnership, on skills and contribution rather than appearance and social position. Catherine cooed and grabbed at Clara's hair, pulling her from her reverie. Clara kissed her daughter's soft head and smiled. This was what she'd been searching for all those years in Boston. Not perfection, not some fairy tale transformation, but authentic connection and purposeful work. A place where she was valued for exactly who she was. Alden looked up from the corral and waved, his face breaking into a smile when he saw them. Clara waved back, her heart full in a way she'd never quite experienced before. This was home. Not because it was perfect or because everyone accepted her without question, but because she'd fought for her place here and won it through dignity, skill, and unwavering self-respect. The woman they'd mocked when she stepped off that train had become the woman the whole valley respected, not through changing who she was, but through refusing to be diminished by others' narrow vision. She was Clara Barrett now, wife, mother, seamstress, rancher's partner, and she'd earned every single aspect of that identity. As she turned to go back inside, Catherine babbling happily on her hip, Clara paused for one last look at the valley spreading out in the morning light. This was her life now, the life she'd built from nothing but determination and self-worth. And it was more than enough. It was everything.